Inevitability. Life is filled with patterns. It is a grand and human struggle to break apart the patterns that plague us and to elevate the sacred patterns that save us. But what happens when a people, a civilization, an entire era of existence becomes trapped in a cycle of madness? What, or more importantly, who has the divine mandate to break the eternal wheel? Greetings, I'm Old Man Zoo, and this is the Symbolism of Final Fantasy I. The name Final Fantasy was famously chosen because, as the story goes, Square was experiencing financial difficulties, and it was thought that this strange RPG game might be the last game that they ever published, thus the name Final Fantasy. As much as I like the story, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the title's creator and director, has a bit more grounded version of the name's origin. Sakaguchi originally wanted his game to have an alliterative name with the word fantasy incorporated into it so that it could easily be represented in the Roman alphabet as FU or FF, which is an abbreviation so intuitive that any of my fellow Final Fantasy fanboys I've ever had the fabulous fortune of finding fellowship with inevitably uses this shorthand in casual conversation in the series. The original name for Final Fantasy was going to be Fighting Fantasy, but this name was already taken up by a series of gamebooks that combine the use of dice rolls and a sort of choose-your-own-adventure style of book navigation to weave a fantasy story driven by player choice. It's a bit ambiguous about how the team actually landed on the name Final for the first F of their FF title. Sakaguchi has stated before that, quote, anything that started with an F would have been fine for the title, so Forsaken Fantasy, Fallen Fantasy, Foretold Fantasy? Maybe, but it's hard to discount the question instantly begged by the title Final Fantasy. What's so final about it? Especially when you learn that as of the making of this video, there are 16 mainline Final Fantasy titles, and that's not counting the various remakes, spin-offs, remasters, and targeted sequels. It seems the title Final Fantasy was only half right. To my great shame, I have to admit that prior to working on this video, I have never fully played through Final Fantasy I. I've played through many of the other popular Final Fantasy titles, including spending an unhealthy amount of time in FF14, but I never finished Final Fantasy I before. My earliest memories of this title was that it featured a bland storyline, and I could only remember being confused as to what to do and where to go, and I didn't really understand the concept of grinding XP at the time. That said, picking this title back up and actually playing it from beginning to end, well, I really wish I had done this sooner. This game is absolutely drenched in mythologies from all over the globe. You'll see what I mean soon. But first, let's talk a little bit about what I consider to be the three fathers of Final Fantasy as stated from the developers themselves. First, a man I mentioned earlier, Hironobu Sakaguchi, was the creator, director, and overall driving force behind the existence of Final Fantasy. Sakaguchi has stated that two video games, Ultima and Wizardry, both games released in 1981 for the Apple II, heavily influenced his idea for the creation of Final Fantasy. Ironically, Ultima's name also has a similar origin. Richard Garriott, the developer of Ultima, originally wanted to call the game Ultimatum, but couldn't because, much like with the name Fighting Fantasy, the name Ultimatum was already taken. So, Garriott shortened the name to Ultima. And just like Final Fantasy was hardly final, Ultima wasn't the ultimate, with 9 mainline titles in its franchise. Both the Ultima and Wizardry developers have stated the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop game as being their principal source of inspiration, taking the rules, stats, player creation, monsters, and combat and digitizing them into a computer game. Even Sakaguchi's fellow developer Akitoshi Kawazu based Final Fantasy's battle system directly after the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop game. If you look closely, the menu elements even look like game cards or character sheets used in a D&D session. It would be easy to simply say that Final Fantasy is a Japanese version of Ultima and that Ultima is just a digitization of Dungeons & Dragons. But if you're this far into the video, you know we're not going to stop our analysis there. It seems pretty clear that Final Fantasy comes from other fantasy games, but let's take the question a little further. Let's look at the myths, the legends, and stories represented in the various aspects of Final Fantasy. As I do with all of these symbolism videos, I'm going to attempt to constrain myself to something I call game scope, where I attempt to only analyze game materials that were contemporaneous and available at the time of the original release of the game. And to that end, I want to show you something cool about this game that you simply don't see done anymore. This is the Final Fantasy Explorer's Handbook, bundled with every retail copy of the Final Fantasy NES cart. And what a wondrous thing it is. Illustrations, detailed instruction, a strategy guide that covers the first half of a game, a glorious spread of the world map including maps of several of the dungeons in the game, a breakdown of the types of magic, weapons, and armor in the game, and finally, a large enemy identification chart featuring enemy names, hit points, weaknesses, immunities, and special attacks. With the undeniable success of Final Fantasy, Squaresoft typically released these large manual/strategy guides with all of their RPG releases, albeit the practice withered away over time. This manual is over 80 pages of physical media goodness. Fast forward to Square's last release for the Super Nintendo, the endlessly charming Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars, and one can see the memetical DNA of the original Final Fantasy manual in its layout. Yet the length was cut in half. Fast forward again to one of the last RPGs Square released before their merger with Enix Corporation, Final Fantasy X-2, with a manual page count of 28, with only about 20 of those pages featuring actual game-y goodness. This is no doubt a video for another day, but there's something special about game media that comes bundled with a game. Whether it's the retro charm of Shovel Knight's digital manual, or the angular stained glass illustrations in the comic book depicting the origin of blasphemous, stoic, penitent one protagonist. Granted, these types of goodies are often a part of some collector's edition or Kickstarter stretch goal, whereas in the halcyon days of late 80s and early 90s gamedom, these types of things were often pleasant surprises. So we've talked at length about where the final in Final Fantasy comes from, but what about the fantasy in Final Fantasy? Let's start with the world of fantasy in general. Rolling green hills, grand castles, caves with dragons, beautiful maidens to be rescued, dashing heroes to do the rescuing. Ancient magics and holy Christendom. This idea of Dark Age and medieval fantasy comes from a condensed blend of Anglo-Saxon history and myth ranging from about 400 AD all the way to 1000 AD. Perhaps the most famous example of ancient literature coming from this era is the poem of Beowulf. In the tale, the eponymously named hero Beowulf comes to the aid of the King of the Danes. The king's castle, or more accurately his great hall, has come under nightly attack from the terrifying monster Grendel. Beowulf, placing his faith in God, fights the monster barehanded and prevails. Grendel, critically wounded and literally disarmed, flees to his marshy lair and dies. There's a lot more to talk about here when it comes to fantasy, Final Fantasy, and Beowulf, but let's stay focused on just the setting for now. So we have Beowulf and the various oral traditions like Beowulf that feature heroes often endowed with the power of destiny, God, or both. Their adventures typically occur in locales commonly found in Central and Northern Europe. Green rolling hills, jagged craggy caves, volcanic mountains, and rustic villages. These tales are eventually captured painstakingly by hand in writing by Christian monks likely around 700 to 1000 AD, hundreds of years before the printing press, though one critical setting piece seems to be missing. Castles. Stone castles that we associate with the fantasy storytelling toolkit didn't exist in the life and times of Beowulf or in the epic tales of King Arthur. Stone architecture didn't start making an appearance in Europe until just around 1000 AD. But when it did, Europe also got an upgrade to its old legends. Suddenly, when the troubadour or bard is singing about brave King Arthur, he's not living in a wooden hill fort, but instead in a grand stone castle, just like a proper European monarch should. So think of all the stories, myths, and legends generated in roughly a 600-year time span. Run it through the grinder of sacred oral traditions, like a multi-generational game of telephone, except deviating from the tale is a blasphemy against your ancestors. You then carry these sacred tales into the age of writing, each stroke of the quill a sacred duty and preservation. And then centuries later, you place these medieval tales into the highly calibrated imaginations of authors like J.R.R. Tolkien and Robert E. Howard, who then distill these memes into a concentrated mixture of meaning, and you get the fantasy setting. FF, Final Fantasy, the last, or perhaps latest, in a lineage of telling us a story of fantasy, of fantastical myths rooted in our shared history. I know I've talked heavily about European legends, but as I'm sure many of you longtime FF fans know, Western myth isn't the only source of inspiration Final Fantasy draws from. But we'll get to that. Let's take a look at the game. We're greeted with a pairing of blue screen and white text. I have to stop here and really overanalyze this color blue, as I tend to do in these videos, because you're going to be seeing it a lot in this game. This color blue is the main menu. It's the character creation screen, the party management screen, and in every shop in the game. This specific color is the color of Final Fantasy as a franchise, a deep ultramarine blue. What is ultramarine anyway? When I was doing some color matching on the RGB values for this color blue, I found that the swatch that most commonly seemed to come up was ultramarine blue. Ultramarine was a rare pigment derived from the equally rare gemstone lapis lazuli. It was considered a prestige pigment during the Renaissance, reserved for holy symbols such as the Virgin Mary. Even the word ultramarine hints at its costly production, a phrase that comes from the Latin ultra mare, meaning beyond the sea. It makes sense, considering it was typically mined out of what is now modern-day Afghanistan, shipped across the Middle East and over the Mediterranean Sea to European artisans. Blue. This color blue was thought to be the color of the sea, the ocean's royalty, otherworldliness. It makes sense that as we start our Final Fantasy, we're in an open expanse, an endless blue. Then the text appears and we're greeted with that classic Final Fantasy prelude music that appears as a musical motif in some form or another in every mainline Final Fantasy title. In my opinion, it's the sound of the myths of creation, of falling into a storybook, or perhaps traveling across a vast sea to a different time and a different place. From the intro text, we learned that, quote, "The world is veiled in darkness, the wind stops, the sea is wild, and the earth begins to rot. The people wait, their only hope, a prophecy. When the world is in darkness, 4 warriors will come." After a long journey, 4 young warriors arrive, each holding an orb. This intro is the reading of a prophecy, as we'll come to learn, that has been foretold for hundreds of years. When the prologue screen ends, we see a simple menu with 2 choices, continue or new game. What caught my eye was the selector we're given to make our decision. It's a hand, or perhaps more accurately, a finger. That finger is not just used here, but throughout the whole game. It selects the heroes, it chooses their names, it indicates what actions are used where, who gets healed, what gets attacked, and which things are bought and sold throughout the game. Just whose finger is this anyway? Speaking of the party leader, let's talk about our potential heroes. We know from the prophecy that 4 warriors will come. The Final Fantasy Explorer's Handbook suggests that if we just want to get into the game quickly, just press the A button repeatedly until the game starts. Doing this will give you a default party consisting of a fighter, a thief, a black mage, and a red mage. However, I really wanted to play with that iconic FF character, the black mage, so I rebalanced my party by dropping the thief and red mage for a white and black mage. The fighter took my namesake, the black belt I gave the hyper-creative name for fist in Japanese, and the mages are named after my daughters, which prompted them to occasionally check in with me to make sure I hadn't killed them in some random encounter. Since I'm leaving two characters to wander in the ultramarine mists of what could have been, let's talk about them real quick. The first one we'll look at is the Thief, which we can trace back to Dungeons & Dragons, specifically a type of expansion which D&D creator Gary Gygax referred to as a rule supplement called Greyhawk. In this rule supplement, we're introduced to the character class of the Thief, who can pick locks, open treasure chests, and launch surprise attacks. But where did Gygax get the inspiration for the Thief class? Well, luckily Gygax makes the trail easy to find, since he states a list of his inspirations in the first edition of the Dungeon Master's Guide. In it, we find reference to the Grey Mouser, a highly skilled rogue who is skilled with a blade and a sharp, cynical tongue to match. The Grey Mouser himself might have been influenced by an even older archetype dating back to Italian theater from the 1600s, referenced to as a Scaramouche, which was a character that relied on his wit, roguish charm, and agile swordplay. It's interesting to consider that the Scaramouche archetype might be a common ancestor to two famous character tropes, one being the Thief, and another, well, slightly more sinister character type. But that's a video for another day. The other neglected character we won't be taking on our adventure is the Red Mage. Functionally, the Red Mage was meant as an all-rounder character, a balanced choice that could do a little bit of everything. That concept of balance is important. Keep that in mind. Just like with the Thief, the Red Mage was likely taken from a very similar character class in Wizardry called the Bishop. In Wizardry, the Bishop class is a magic specialist that can cast both Priest, or white magic, and Mage, or black magic. In addition, the Bishop class can also wear light armor and has some limited utility in melee combat. Historically, bishops were also thought to be intellectual masters of two worlds. They of course needed to be experts in the Christian faith, but they also served in a secular capacity, acting as judges, interpreters, scholars, and even engaging in scientific pursuits. This versatile dual nature could perhaps be why in the Wizardry game they are a suitable archetype for a character with mixed abilities, and why Final Fantasy takes the bishop template as a foundation for the Red Mage. But what about the color red? In Japan, the color red is often associated with leadership, which we'll see more of soon. But red can also be the color of balance. In the design language of Japanese Sentai Tokusatsu that would go on to spawn the Power Rangers here in the States, red is the color of the all-rounder, the balanced warrior. And the Red Mage is just that. He can use black magic, white magic, he can equip blades, similar to a thief. And much like the Thief, the Red Mage owes some of its aesthetic to the Scaramouche, that trickster rogue character of old Italian theater with the flashy plumed hat. But perhaps an even better match for the Red Mage appearance is that of the stylish, swashbuckling hero from Alexandre Dumas' Three Musketeers. The Three Musketeers was heavily inspired by true events going on in 1700s France, which gives us the sword fighter archetype, but decorated in the high French fashion of the era. So what about the party members we did choose? Well, we already hinted at the first one, our red-clad fighter. As before, red here represents leadership, and the fighter class in Final Fantasy I is naturally set up to be your frontline warrior. He can wear the thickest armor, wield the heaviest weapons, and due to how Final Fantasy's battle system is set up, he'll likely be taking most of the attacks. He can wear the thickest armor, wield the heaviest weapons, and due to how Final Fantasy's battle system is set up, he's likely to be taking most of the attacks. A brief note on combat. Whoever is at the top of your party list is considered a front row character, with each slot after that becoming more and more of a back row character. The way the internal dice rolls work, the character in slot 1 will take about 40% of the attacks, then the next character will take about 30%, then the character after that will take 20%, and your last character, the one furthest in the back, will take about 10% of the attacks. These percentages aren't exact, but it gives you a picture of how you should set up your party order. Heavy armor up front, squishies in the back. We've already talked about the mimetic origins of the fighter and how he can be traced all the way back to heroic Beowulf, filtered down through the holy warriors of Christianity's Dark Age, refined by Tolkien, made barbarian by Howard, before making his way as the signature class for Ultima, Wizardry, and Final Fantasy. We've talked at great length about the warrior/fighter archetype, and even more so the holy warrior archetype in my Castlevania Symbolism videos. So if you'd like to hear more of my interpretations on that subject, check those out. Next we have the Black Belt, which is a class name so obviously over-localized for English audiences that I found myself continually referring to this class by its more natural name, the Monk. And sure enough, when we look at the Japanese manual, this class features the kanji for Monku. As I'm sure you've already guessed, this class name was changed from Monk to Black Belt due to religious censorship concerns from Nintendo of America. Similar to how the Thief class was added to Dungeons & Dragons via the Greyhawk supplement, the Monk too was added via D&D's second supplement entitled Blackmoor. In the supplement, we learn that monks fight better unarmed, wear light armor or sometimes no armor at all, which is mirrored in how FF1's Black Belt class works. Gygax cites a series of novels called The Destroyer, which features the exploits of a government assassin who is trained in a mystical Korean martial art that, through harsh training, grants the assassin near superhuman melee combat abilities. The actual Eastern monk as a religious entity and literary trope can be found all the way back to the 14th century in one of China's great classic novels, The Water Margin, where one of the characters in particularly, Lu Jishun, is a supernaturally strong Buddhist monk that specializes in martial brawling. It's interesting to think that the East's FF1's Black Belt is a reflection of the West's Dungeons & Dragons monk, which is itself a reflection of a novel that was inspired by the Eastern martial arts archetype, a mirror reflecting a mirror reflecting a mirror. Moving further down the row, we have the White Mage. Here we get some more heavy influence from wizardry, which features a class called the Priest, which is a character that can cast all manner of healing spells, along with being able to damage the undead. They also excel in casting defensive buffs, just like the White Mage. Wizardry in turn borrows from the Dungeons & Dragons Cleric class. And going back to Gary Gygax, he states the Cleric class was inspired by the character Bishop Turpin. Turpin was a warrior priest in the 11th century French poem, La Chanson du Roland, or the Song of Roland. In the poem, Turpin isn't shy about joining battle against the pagans. One verse translated from the poem reads, "The archbishop strikes the pagans down, by his great valor he slays 400. This verse actually rhymes in the original French, but I won't make you suffer through my bad attempt at speaking it. The poem itself describes Turpin as blessing and performing Christian rites for his fellow warriors, which acts as a spiritual salve. These aren't described as white magic spells as we come to know them in Final Fantasy, but you can see where these holy Christian prayers could be interpreted as symbolizing healing magic. One quick note about the standard cleric/white mage weapon set. In many RPG titles, the healer class is often depicted as carrying some sort of blunt weapon. For instance, in World of Warcraft, the priest class often carries a mace. In Final Fantasy I, the white mage carries a hammer. This comes from an early Christian church law prohibiting a clergy member from shedding blood. However, the popular myth was that clergy members would get around this prohibition of bloodshedding by using blunt weapons instead of bladed weapons. It's a little murky, as if that's actually a historically accurate workaround that priests and bishops made use of, but I found the myth to be really interesting, and it's such a compelling foundational myth that we still see used in RPG healing classes to this day. Last but certainly not least, we have the Black Mage. As you've probably guessed by now, the Black Mage maps very well to Wizardry's Sorcerer class and D&D's Magic User class. These were characters that were physically weak but magically powerful. They may not be able to throw or take a punch, but they can set an entire field of enemies on fire. The aesthetic for the Magic User, as represented in D&D and ultimately FF1, seems to be heavily influenced by Tolkien's Gandalf the Grey from The Lord of the Rings. Long, flowing robes, tall, pointy hat. He even uses a sword, although FF1 shortens the Black Mage blade down to the use of daggers. Tolkien himself describes Gandalf as, quote, an Odinic wanderer. Odinic, as in the Norse god Odin, the god of wisdom, knowledge, and magic. So we can see a line of succession. The ancient Norse god of magic, Odin, inspires one of the most iconic wizards in Western literature, Gandalf the Grey, who then inspires the wizard archetype encapsulated in the Dungeons & Dragons magic user class, which is then extrapolated into the Black Mage class we know and love in Final Fantasy. Another sidebar here, just on the interesting and iconic design of the Black Mage. If I had to choose a single sprite to represent the entirety of the Final Fantasy franchise, it would probably be the classic Black Mage sprite. It's the perfect blending of instantly recognizable Western tropes mixed with some classic Japanese conventions, such as the faceless yokai meme that's often symbolically associated with a roguish character, or even the faceless spellcaster design popularized by Zelda's Wizrobe enemies or Gauntlet's wizard enemy. However, there's just something inherently mischievous about the Black Mage sprite, but maybe I just read too much 8-bit theater growing up. With our parties selected and named, using Final Fantasy's ubiquitous finger selector, our heroes begin their quest. Our scene opens up on the grassy flatlands just south of what appears to be a population center. What's notable here is that our heroes start off between this population center and an improved harbor area to the south, hinting that we actually arrived here by boat and are starting the adventure mid-stride. Intuitively, the game's design urges us to go north, towards civilization, towards people. Doing so brings us to the town of Coneria. One of the first things we learn about the town is the name Coneria, along with its nickname, the Dream City. Interestingly, Coneria is likely a mistranslation that is meant to be read as Cornelia, and it comes from the Latin root cornu, meaning horn. In fact, later releases of this game make that correction. In fact, many of the towns we'll encounter in Final Fantasy, particularly on the southern continent, seem to derive from various European civilizations, with Cornelia being an ancient Roman surname. Another interesting connection is that there are a few lines in the Greek epic The Odyssey where Penelope describes a dream where she witnesses two gates, one made of ivory and one made of horn. Through these gates pass dreams. The dreams that pass through the ivory gates are lies, and the dreams that pass through the horn gate are truths. So we have Coneria, Cornelia, a derivative of the word meaning horn, and then a connection to a dream, the dream city, that talks about the duality of dreams. Some dreams are lies, some dreams are truths. Coneria is a city that produces darkness and light, as we'll soon come to find out. Browsing through the various shops, I noticed that our party starts out with 400 gold, which led me to assume that our adventurers all met up with 100 gold each and just threw their life savings all together into one big pot. And judging from the earlier prologue, these adventurers were chosen by fate to meet here, at the City of Dreams. It's not directly explained, but recall from the opening prologue. After a long journey, 4 young warriors arrive, each holding an orb. How did they get those orbs? How did they know to come here? The young warriors are being guided here by fate, by the hand of destiny. And it isn't just destiny that has noticed our warriors. The villagers themselves seem acquainted with the prophecy stated at the start of the game. They see our warriors, they see the orbs, they know what's up. In addition to being recognized as chosen by fate, the villagers clue us in on a crisis currently affecting the kingdom. A princess is in need of saving. What's more, her rescue seems to be at least tangentially related to the prophecy, a prophecy foretold by someone named Lucan. Interrogating the villagers further, we learn that Lucan returned to a place called Crescent Lake to rejoin his colleagues. It might benefit our heroes to keep that in mind. As we begin to leave the town, we get teased with another location, the port city of Provoca to the east. But for now, the warriors decide to seek an audience with the distressed king. Just to the north of the town is a structure that, to my eye, looks like a French Renaissance-style castle with the soaring turrets, the spindly spires, and we can even see the medieval pennants hung up from the tips of the spires. This is Castle Coneria. The castle staff here gives us more information regarding not just Conerian problems, but also mentions a place called Elfland, giving us another point of interest to store in our mental maps. Note this NPC design is referred to as a sage and represents a man with a long beard and a pointed hat. These characters usually provide guidance to our heroes, or at the very least an encouraging word. A good sage the old man be like that sometimes. This sage tells us how the castle treasury was magically locked 400 years ago with a mystic key, and how that key was entrusted to the Prince of Elfland for safekeeping. And checking the treasury doors, yep, locked. We also learn the princess's name, Sarah, and that Sarah's sister and her mother, Queen Jane, are racked with worry. Wandering further down the halls, we meet a robed NPC that represents the scholar archetype. There's not many of these types of NPCs in the world, but their information tends to be more specific, imparting knowledge rather than sagely advice. For instance, this scholar cryptically tells us that a man named Garland used to be a good knight until something. Ascending to the second floor and entering the throne room, we meet the king himself, who gives us our first official quest. Garland, the knight mentioned to us earlier, has kidnapped Princess Sarah. The king seems utterly convinced that these warriors are the light warriors of Lucan's prophecy, and implores our heroes for their aid. We also learn that Garland is hiding out in a ruin to the northwest. So our warriors, or more appropriately our warriors of light, have their first objective: travel to Garland's hideout, defeat the evil knight, and rescue the princess. However, like any good story, our heroes are not real ultimate warriors. Not yet anyway. They must train, they must hone their abilities in order to become strong enough to face Garland. And to that end, we enter the first of many training montages. The random encounter system used in Final Fantasy was lifted nearly wholesale from Wizardry, which in turn adapted the wandering monster system from Dungeons & Dragons. The idea is to represent danger at literally every and any step, but also with every step comes the opportunity for our heroes to learn from it. To quote Nietzsche here, "That which doesn't kill us makes us stronger." Every encounter our party of four survives rewards us with experience. Experience rewards us with levels, granting increased strength and magical prowess, but also strategy on how to defeat the next enemy. Also, every enemy carries gold, which I think can be interpreted in one of two ways. Either these enemies have ingested the remnants of past adventures that seemingly always contain their coin purse, or each of these dangerous monsters contains some sort of global bounty that is paid out immediately upon death for the sake of expediency. I tend to lean more towards the latter idea. I think it gives our world a little more depth to think that the surrounding kingdoms view these dangerous monsters as worth eradicating. Speaking of monsters, let's look at some of the creatures wandering the fields and forests between Coneria and the ruins. The first creature we encounter is the Imp. Imps are famously thought to be lesser demons or servants to witches. In fact, there's an infamous late 15th century witch hunting manual called the Malleus Maleficarum that describes an imp without actually using the word. These are small demons that spread illness, harm livestock, torment a witch's enemies, and enact general cruel-hearted mischief. The imps of FF are small, double-horned enemies, dressed up as little jesters and sporting a wily grin. They also serve as perfect fodder for our heroes to slay. The next enemy we run into while crossing the swampy fields north of Coneria is the wolf. Wolves have always had an adversarial relationship with the people of medieval Europe. They didn't just represent a threat to people, but to people's livestock. During times of war, wolf populations would grow and become more aggressive due to battlefields serving as a convenient buffet of corpses. It wasn't uncommon to see organized hunting parties sent out to control wolf populations, much like we're doing now. Venturing closer to the ruins, we encounter large spiders. Recall from our dive into Castlevania that spiders are symbols of deceit. They lay traps and utilize venom to subdue their prey. Luckily, this initial spider enemy isn't poisonous, but Final Fantasy has tons of enemy variants, and we'll run into the spider's variant soon enough. The final enemy we can find roaming the countryside is the oddly named Mad Pony. This basic enemy might be reference to the wild horse enemy that can be found in Dungeons & Dragons, except the Mad Pony sports a menacing horn. They're a whole host of basic animal enemies that are then gradually upgraded into more menacing variants as you progress into more challenging areas of Final Fantasy. We'll talk more about the mythical horse enemies a little later. After cutting their collective teeth on some basic enemies, our heroes decide to rush into Garland's crumbling hideout, the infamous Temple of Fiends. From the outside, the Temple of Fiends resembles a crumbling Roman ruin with its white exterior, perhaps constructed of marble, and its decaying Doric columns. To the medieval mind, Roman ruins were considered impossible structures. They didn't understand how the Romans managed to construct such massive, heavy buildings. What's more, these ruins often contained Latin script, which might have been unreadable to the common medieval peasant, which further added to the mystique. And finally, nature often reclaimed these ancient structures, making them great places for unsavory societal elements to hide out in. Inside the temple, our warriors of light encounter two enemy types we've talked about at great length on this channel, so I'll give them a quick overview. The first enemy type is the zombie, which is, in my view, a walking mockery of man, a creature that consumes but cannot be satiated and can only reproduce by desecrating the bodies of its victims. They rot but do not die. They are an embodiment of mindless gluttony. The other enemy we run into is called the Bone, which is FF's version of the animated skeleton. Recall that the skeleton is a representation of human mortality. For Final Fantasy, which likely took the Bone enemy from D&D's skeleton enemy, we can trace the lineage back to Ray Harryhausen's iconic stop-motion fight scene in the 1963 film Jason and the Argonauts, where Jason and his crew fight a band of animated and armed skeletons. Gygax has acknowledged that Harryhausen's work in monster design influenced the monsters of D&D, which of course would go on to influence Final Fantasy. The last novel enemy we run into in the temple is called the Creep. To me, these things look like some sort of giant grub with a gaping maw poised to bite our heroes. In Dungeons & Dragons, there's a similar enemy type called the rot grub that burrows under the skin and can kill your hero from the inside. And rot grubs are just the natural fantasy version of real parasitic creatures like the infamous botfly larva that burrows into the flesh and feeds on living tissue until it reaches maturity, where it then chews its way back out. While engaged with a large pack of wolves, my party suffers its first casualty. Ken falls to the floor unconscious. With resources running thin, I have no choice but to retreat back to Canaria, where my black belt can be revived at the local clinic, and my party can spend some of its hard-earned bounty. This is also a good opportunity to talk a bit more about some of the magic we'll be using during our adventure. Canaria offers us a chance to learn some introductory spells. We've already talked about the origins of white magic and how it was inspired by early Christian blessings, being taken to a more overtly supernatural conclusion. FF1 limits each level of magic to 3 spell slots, but each level has a total of 4 spells that can be bought, which means we must choose which 3 out of the 4 spells available that we want for each level of magic. I chose Cure, which can restore a small amount of HP, Harm, which is a spell that only harms undead creatures, and Fog, which can raise the target's defensive ability. For the Black Mage roster, I chose Fire, which launches a fireball at the enemy, Slep, which can put an entire field of enemies to sleep, and Lit, which, similar to Fire, launches a bolt of lightning at the enemy. The elemental, destructive, entropic properties of Black Mage magic naturally has roots in Dungeons & Dragons. But where did this idea of elemental magic come from? Babylon, specifically the ancient magician priests of one of the world's earliest known professional priesthoods. The Babylonians had extensive rituals that covered everything from demonology and purification rites to astrological omens and curse breaking. They believed that there were spirits in nature that inhabited different elemental aspects, which is an idea we will come to see further developed later. The idea of elemental magics, of calling upon the chaotic forces of nature using stored rituals, was transmitted across thousands of years and multiple cultures before crystallizing into the tropes of medieval magic we might associate with Gandalf the Grey or Merlin. There's a long and very interesting history around the transmission of magic as we understand it in video games today, but that might have to be a video for another day. With our party fully recovered, we journey back across the Conarian wilderness, re-infiltrate the Temple of Fiends, and finally enter Garland's chambers. Garland is waiting. The evil knight states his intent to crush us for daring to take his princess. Garland's horned helmet resembles the head of the devil, and his azure blue cape is a symbol that hints that at one time he might have been a noble knight. Recall that blue is typically the color of heroes, yet Garland has fallen to corruption, kidnapping the princess and betraying his king. Garland hits hard, but he's ultimately outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Garland lies defeated, a cadre of bats key urgently around his dark chamber. Getting a better look at the room, we see it appears to be some sort of shrine with an ominous black orb placed between two stone monsters. Flanking the monsters appear to be an X-shaped pattern of statues that resemble some sort of winged bishop. This place radiates darkness. The warriors of light free Sarah, and we fast-track back to the throne room of Coneria Castle. Here, Sarah rewards the warriors with a mysterious heirloom that's been in the royal family for 2,000 years, the lute. For some reason, Garland stole this lute when he kidnapped the princess, but why? Our heroes don't have long to ponder the question before we're tasked with the fulfillment of Lucan's prophecy, to restore the power of the orbs. With Coneria's royal crisis resolved, the king orders the completion of a bridge north of the castle that links the lands of Coneria to a large peninsula. As the light warriors travel out of the castle, we can stop and talk to the scholar one more time to learn that the lute can break the evil gate, presumably relating to the evil orb we saw in the temple ruin. But what lies beyond the evil gate? Our heroes leave Coneria and make for the newly built bridge, completing the introductory quest and properly launching our adventure. We're greeted with the true title screen for Final Fantasy, along with some narration, and I quote, "And so their journey begins. What awaits the four, they do not know. Each holding an orb that 2,000 years ago shined with beauty from within, but now only darkness. Come, start your journey. Return the light of peace to our world." What's particularly striking about this title screen is that it's actually hidden by a decently sized introductory quest. I think this design choice puts a lot of faith in the player. I think if this choice had been put in front of some focus group, they would have insisted that this awesome title screen be the first thing the player sees. But no, Sakaguchi and his team had faith that the player would see this screen when it made sense to show them. And because of this, we intuitively know who the silhouetted figures are in the foreground. They are our warriors of light. We know the castle in the background is likely Castle Coneria, and we know that their grand adventure is just getting started. Traveling north, our heroes explore the newly accessible wilderness. We were already given hints about places we should visit, such as Crescent Lake and Provoca far to the east, and there's still the Elfland Prince to contact regarding the mysterious mystic key. But before all that, our heroes wander north towards a conspicuous cave. On the way to this cave, we run into a new enemy, the ogre. The ogre creature was popularized in an old French collection of stories called Histoires ou Contes du Temps Passé, or Stories or Tales from Past Times. One of the stories tells about a little boy and his brothers that wander out into the forest only to encounter a pack of wolves that then chase them to the house of a man-eating giant, otherwise known as an ogre. In the tale, the little boy manages to outfox the dim-witted ogre, rescuing his brothers, and even steal the ogre's magical speed boots. Maybe that's how Sonic the Hedgehog got so fast. One could even argue that the idea for the massive, threatening man could be traced back to Christendom's most famous giant, Goliath, who, similar to the ogre, is outmaneuvered by a small boy with a 100% critical shot rating. Reaching the cave, our heroes venture inside and thankfully find the interior free of monsters. Immediately, one might recognize the animated broom sweeping about and speaking to our heroes backwards. T-Celeste B. Husup. Push B select. Doing this indoors yields nothing, but doing this outside will actually open the game's world map and really give the player the scope of just how large the world is they're adventuring in. The magic brooms are likely a callback to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's retelling of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which tells a story of a lazy apprentice that attempts to take a shortcut from his chores and use a magic spell to animate a broom to do his work for him. If this sounds really familiar, then you might be like me and saw the animated version of this story brought to life in Disney's Fantasia, where Mickey Mouse plays the titular Sorcerer's Apprentice. At the back of the cave, our heroes encounter a witch who complains she cannot see without the aid of her magical crystal. We'll later discover that this witch is named Matoya. This was a tricky one to research because Matoya, being a blind witch who needs a crystal to see, is a direct reference to the tale of Perseus. In the tale, Perseus seeks help from a trio of blind witches called the Grey Sisters. Initially, they refuse to aid him, so Perseus steals their magic crystal that the sisters use to see and holds it ransom until he gets the information he's looking for. But the name Matoya sounds suspiciously like a different Greek witch, Medea. Medea was the sorceress from the tale of Jason and the Argonauts, who helps Jason retrieve the magical golden fleece. Realizing that Matoya isn't going to help us with anything until she can see again, our warriors exit her cave and take a peek at the world map for the first time. Notice the symbols at the four corners of the map. I think the symbol has a direct reference to the events of the game, but we'll revisit that idea a little later. For now, if we just view the symbols individually, it appears to be a monstrous serpent entwined around a blade. And the backing plate of the symbol looks to be some sort of shield or crest, and note the four circular orbs on the border of this plate. Remember that for later, because we're going to come back to it. After a brief glance at the map, the warriors decide to journey east to the nearest town. On the way, we run into another new enemy, the iguana. Like the mad pony and the wolf, this is part of that class of FF low-level monsters that are just meant to represent an aggressive animal. The iguana's variants will become a lot more interesting as we progress through the adventure. After trekking across the continent, our heroes finally arrive at the port town of Provoca. The town name of Provoca almost sounds like a name inspired by Slavic naming convention. And in fact, if we look at the root of prav or pravo, we find this word means right or true. However, upon entering the town, the first man we talk to tells us nothing is right in Provoca. The town has been besieged by pirates. Towards the northwestern quarter of the town, we run into Bika, the pirate, and his crew of cutthroats. Interestingly, Bika might be a reference to a scheming court advisor of the same name contained in the pages of the Gesta Danorum, or Deeds of the Danes, written in the late 12th century. In the story, Bika manipulates the king of a coastal kingdom into believing his popular nephew is plotting a rebellion. Bika is a Loki-esque trickster sowing discord to strengthen his own power base. And similarly, the Bika of FF has created a scene of chaos in the coastal town of Provoca, but he makes the grave mistake of attacking our heroes. The pirate crew is many, but our heroes, toughened by their transcontinental journey, make short work of them. Realizing he's lost the upper hand, Bika surrenders his ship to the adventurers and promises to behave himself. With order restored in Provoca, we learn some more important information regarding our next steps. We learn that the elf prince of Elfland is asleep and can only be awakened by Matoya, which gives our heroes even more motivation to find Matoya's missing crystal. From a refugee sage, we hear our first mention of a town far to the west called Melmond. We aren't clear on what kind of trouble Melmond is in, only that it is. With a quick resupply, our heroes take command of Bika's ship and set sail on the vast inland waters of the Aldi Sea. The sea also gives us a great opportunity to do some more training. In the Aldi Sea, and in fact in any open ocean area in Final Fantasy, we run into a collection of new aquatic enemies. In the first encounter, we see the Odd Eye, accompanied with a group of Sahags. Odd Eye is likely the analog to D&D's Evil Eye enemy. Now, I hear some of you Dungeons & Dragons aficionados out there saying, "Old man, what about the Beholder? It's D&D's most iconic enemy." And to that I say, silence, young fool, we'll get to the Beholder too. There's actually a much better match for the Beholder in Final Fantasy that we'll run into in due time. The Odd Eye, like any good Evil Eye creature, is a living embodiment of the Greek kakomati, which is the concept that one can be cursed with an evil gaze. If you would like to learn more about the kakomati, I encourage you to check another video I did on it, focusing solely on the symbolic concept where I tie Mega Man and Blasphemous and Prince of Persia together. Oh, and I also toss in Indiana Jones for good measure. The other enemy, the Sahag, is likely a reference to D&D's Sahuagin, which are amphibious humanoid creatures that tend to ambush in large groups. Again, we've run into creatures like this before when we analyzed Castlevania's Fishmen. These creatures are embodiments of the human subconscious. Recall that water is the symbolic dividing line of consciousness. That which exists above is the conscious realm, that which lurks below is the unconscious realm. Fishmen, Sahuagin, Sahags, they are all creatures leaping out from the unconscious unknown into the waking world to drag our heroes into the drowning depths of the Aldi Sea. Just a quick note on variants as they begin to make their appearance here. The GR prepended to an enemy's name is meant to be the word great, and the R is meant to be the word red. So for instance, GR Imp, Great Imp, GR Wolf, Great Wolf. I won't linger too much on these particular variants since they're mainly supposed to indicate via design language that these enemies are stronger versions of their base type. Typically they hit harder and have more HP, but some variants take on different names altogether, like the Arachnid, which is the poisonous version of this spider enemy we encountered earlier. The variants will start to get more interesting, but I won't dwell too long on great and red versions of enemies. Cruising the seas, we encounter one more novel enemy type, the shark. Again, this is another base animal type enemy that I believe is supposed to represent exactly what it says it is. Although it's interesting to think that the shark as a dangerous enemy might have been inspired by the 1975 film Jaws, featuring an infamous killer shark that has no obvious supernatural abilities outside of unusual aggression and a taste for drunken sailors. Another note here. As you can see, I was poisoned in my fight with the arachnids and was under the impression the poison status would go away at the end of the fight. It does not, and I had no way to cleanse this debuff, so I learned the hard way, always carry Pures to cleanse poison. While curing and resupplying my party, I also picked up the next tier of magic spells. For white magic, Mute, which keeps spellcasters from casting spells, and Ailit, which raises elemental defense against lightning, and Invis, which increases the evasion rating of a single ally. For black magic, I picked up Ice, which shoots ice at an enemy, Dark, which can blind an enemy, reducing their attack accuracy, and Slow, which prevents enemies from attacking more than once in a turn. And with our party once again restored, the Warriors of Light make landfall and enter into the southern kingdom of Elfland. Elfland, as one might predict from the name, is a town filled with elves. Elves, as pointy-eared, forest-dwelling fantasy analogs to humans, are a well-worn trope thanks to J.R.R. Tolkien. But how did he come up with this version of the fantasy elf that is so ubiquitous today? Tolkien himself stated that his version of elves came from a combination of two major cultural mythologies. The first would be the light elves of Norse mythology, the Yolsafar. The Yolsafar were described as flawlessly beautiful, radiant creatures that lived in the heavenly realms of Alfheim. They were creatures with divine ancestry. Then we have the Celtic version of elves, the Sidhe. As with Nordic light elves, the Sidhe are an immortal race of creatures that are beautiful, mischievous, and live in fantastical forests that are only accessible during certain mystic windows of time. With the combined ethereality and nobility of Nordic elves and the environmentally harmonious unobtainability of Celtic elves, we get the foundation for the Tolkien elf, which itself serves as the foundation for the fantasy-style elf, which we see populate the pages of D&D and the screens of Final Fantasy. Upon speaking with the first elf they see, the warriors are asked to find a way to wake the elf prince. But before talking with anyone else, our heroes wander into a weapon store and... what's this? Silver sword? 4,000 gold? Time for more training. So after slaughtering untold dozens of wilderness monsters, our heroes return to buy up everything they could possibly want, including upgrades to their white and black magic. We also learn a little bit more from the citizenry of Elfland. We find out that if the Elf Prince isn't awakened soon, Elfland could become dominated by someone referred to as Astos the Dark Elf. We learn that Astos is hiding out somewhere in seclusion, biding his time, and wearing some kind of disguise. We also learn of a haunted ruin simply called the Northwest Castle. A secluded place out in the wilderness? Sounds like a prime dark elf hideout. We also learn that silver weapons and armor are especially effective against monsters, thus validating our outrageous spending spree. It's interesting to note that silver as a holy element capable of monster slaying is a very old idea. It's thought that medieval people, while not necessarily understanding silver's real-world antibacterial properties from a germ theory standpoint, still understood silver's purifying nature when they observed that water stayed fresher and milk spoiled slower in silver containers. This idea of purifying silver carried into folklore, thus giving us the concept of silver as a monster-slaying metal. One last note, there's a tombstone in Elfland that is in fact the only tombstone in the entirety of the game that actually has a readable engraving. Here lies Erdrick, 837 to 866. Rest in peace. Erdrick is a character from Dragon Quest III, or maybe I should say a title from Dragon Quest III, which was developed at roughly the same time as Final Fantasy. Square and Enix had a friendly rivalry at the time, and this wouldn't be the last time the franchises would reference each other. Now, fully equipped with the best Elfland has to offer, the Warriors of Light visit the majestic Castle of Elf. We'll learn a few more details about the prince. Apparently, Astos attacked the castle directly and cursed the prince, placing him in a magically induced sleep 5 years ago. The magical sleep is an interesting folklore tradition made famous by Grimm's Sleeping Beauty, where the Princess Briar Rose is placed under a mystical sleep that simultaneously incapacitates her, but also holds her in a state of suspended animation, much like the elf prince. The castle denizens are also aware that Matoya possesses an herb that can break the sleep curse. And finally, we learn about a cave full of dwarves located somewhere on the west end of the LDC. Having gathered as much information as they can, our heroes set sail to investigate the dwarf cave, but not before running into a few new enemies. The first is the ever-profitable Kaizoku. The name Kaizoku is actually a shortening of the Japanese word Kaizoku, which literally translates to the word pirate. I thought this was pretty funny when I started researching this word. Also, I was always really happy to run into these guys because they drop a much higher amount of gold than most of the enemies at this level, which made saving up for that sweet silver sword just a little bit easier. Landing at an abandoned port northwest of Conaria and en route to the dwarf cave, we run into the Asp, which, as its name suggests, is a poisonous snake. Interestingly, the asp is actually an old Greek term referring to venomous snakes as a general category rather than any specific species. The asp is often referenced in the ancient world as not just a snake, but is used in metaphor to indicate hidden danger and unseen death. Pushing deeper into the western end of the southern continent, we arrive at Dwarf Cave. The cave is another symbol we've talked about at great length on this channel, specifically how it's a portal to the underworld where devils and monsters dwell. It can serve as a place a hero must descend and overcome in order to be born into destiny. But there is also positive symbolism that can be attributed to caves. Here in this cave, the dwarves seem genuinely cheerful. Their cave is a protective womb that shields them from the entropic decline occurring on the surface world. In Greek myth, Zeus is hidden away in a cave on Crete to protect him from his paranoid father. In Islamic mythos, the Prophet Muhammad gains enlightenment by meditating in the cave of Hira. The dwarves, much like the elves, can also trace their origins to the runes of Norse mythology. They're considered a subterranean race, excellent miners and superb weaponsmiths. And sure enough, speaking with the deep denizens of Dwarf Cave, we learn about a dwarf named Narek, who's digging a canal to connect the Aldi Sea with the great outer oceans of the world. We also learn that Astos didn't just curse the elf prince, but he is also behind the theft of Matoya's crystal. We really need to find where this guy is hiding. The Warriors of Light get their first rumor about a magic object called the Floater, which could potentially float anything. And living up to their crafting stereotype, we meet a dwarf blacksmith appropriately named Smith, who claims he can make a truly legendary sword if only he can get his hands on some adamant. Exploring the cave further, we hear about something causing the earth to rot somewhere far to the west. This clue is particularly interesting because it's the first real clue about a crisis that isn't directly related to waking up the Elf Prince. Finally, we meet Narek himself, who needs some TNT of all things to finish his canal project. Having exhausted their investigation in the Dwarf Cave, it's time for our heroes to tackle the mysterious Northwest Castle. Our heroes trek across the vast forested wilderness between Elfland and the lonely Northwest Castle. Upon entering the overgrown halls, the Warriors of Light find the castle completely abandoned. No cleaning maids, no scholars, no sages, no guards, nothing. Just the occasional screaming bat. Our heroes decide to check one last place, the throne room. Inside, we find the castle's only remaining inhabitant, the lone king. He sits on a throne amidst a collection of griffin statues, his unusual green hair tucked into a regal purple robe. The lone king tells us that he too was a victim of Astos, who stole his crown and stashed it somewhere in a place to the south called the Cave of Marsh. The king is insistent that the crown be returned to him as soon as possible. The warriors get no explanation as to why Astos would steal this crown, but this Cave of Marsh could be where the demented dark elf is hiding. This is the place in Final Fantasy where, in my opinion, the difficulty sharply spikes. The enemies hit harder and inflict poison or stun your party into oblivion. For instance, we encounter two monster variants. The first is the Geist, which is a zombie variant that can attack 3 times in a row, with each attack having a chance to stun one of your warriors. Interestingly, Geists in folklore are usually an evil spirit, but more akin to a ghost than some shambling fiend, and the word in German literally translates to the word ghost. The second is the WR wolf, or werewolf, which is the poisonous variant of the common wolf enemy. Again, this is another misnomer since the term were in werewolf is an old English term meaning man, so werewolf, man, wolf. Also note in both the FF design language and in color symbolism, the color green is typically associated with poison, so green wolf, poisonous wolf. We'll see this motif repeated again. When our heroes reach the Marsh Cave, we see that it is literally a hole in the ground. This definitely feels like more of a gaping maw to hell rather than the safe, secure abode we saw in the Dwarf Cave. This also reminds me of another game that I plan to cover on this channel too, but that's a video for another day. Upon entering the Marsh Cave, we find that this place is more of an ancient ruin than an actual cave. Tiled stone floors, dank moss-covered columns, and cut stone rooms characterize this mysterious place. We also run into another novel enemy type, the Muck. We've covered slime-type enemies before. They typically appear as entry-level fodder to crush, and the basic Muck is no exception as they slink and slime their way towards our heroes to no avail. In this first attempt, I quickly realized how underprepared I was to actually make progress in this dungeon. My party was regularly poisoned, stunned, and drained of cure spells, so I made the bold decision to bravely run away. Limping back to town, our heroes also managed to run into a few enemies we haven't encountered before. The first is the Shadow, which tends to attack in large groups and perform multiple attacks each time. This sprite reminds me of a hunched-over Grim Reaper creeping appropriately in the shadows. It peeks out from behind its shroud as if seeking to conceal its skeletal visage. This is a creeping death, a lurking mortality. And then we have the Scorpion, another fantasy staple belonging to the giant insect category of enemies we see in both D&D and FF. Like snakes, scorpions are often associated with venom, skittering along the ground, stinging their prey, and waiting for their victim to succumb before devouring them with alien mandibles. The warriors finally make it back to Elfland to heal up and resupply, including stocking up on heal potions. Lots and lots of heal potions. And you can only buy them one at a time. Now fully prepared and twice as determined, our heroes make their second attempt at Marsh Cave. Back in the musty, forgotten depths of the evil cave, our heroes resume their descent in search of the Lone King's crown. During this visit, we run into the gargoyle enemy. I talk about gargoyles at length in my Castlevania II Simon's Quest Symbolism video, but to give you the short version, gargoyles are representations of sin and evil that the Catholic Church can protect you from. So you have gargoyles are on the outside of the church, angels Mary and Jesus are on the inside of the church. I want to make a note here that as you go deeper in Marsh Cave and many other dungeons in Final Fantasy, the tile sets actually darken slightly, which I thought was such a nice touch to give us the sense that we truly are descending deeper into the dungeons, deeper into the depths, and following the symbolism deeper into hell. Also worth noting that the reverse is also true. So when we get to dungeons where the warriors must ascend floors, the tile sets actually become lighter. Plumbing the deeps of Marsh Cave, our heroes come across a peculiar room with strange, weathered statues flanking a single treasure chest. The statues are set up in such a way that the Warriors of Light must approach the treasure chest in one particular direction. Something feels off. As the warriors step forward, they're ambushed. This is the strangely named wizard enemy. Oddly enough, this enemy can't actually cast any spells, despite resembling a Cthulhian spellcaster with its mage's staff and cephalomorphic head. However, these enemies are no pushover. They hit very hard with those magic staves. We'll revisit this enemy again when its variants start to appear, but for now, our heroes slay the abyssal creatures and flip the latch on the treasure chest to find the missing crown. The warriors look around, half expecting Astos to attack from the shadows, but no such attack occurs. With their treasure in tow, the Warriors of Light fight their way out of Marsh Cave, make the long trek north, back to the isolated Northwest Castle, and enter the Lone King's throne room. However, as the warriors approach the king, they get that feeling again, that same feeling they got when they saw those strange statues. That feeling when they saw that conspicuously placed chest. The Lone King's face twists unnaturally when he glimpses the crown. As we feared, another ambush. Astos, disguised as the Lone King, reveals himself. He intends to slaughter our heroes and take the crown for himself. But why? What's so important about this crown? The answers will have to wait. The warriors engage Astos in combat. This is the first true boss fight in Final Fantasy. Astos opens up by casting the spell Rub, which rubs or erases one of your party members, instantly killing them. However, there's always a chance the spell misses, as you can see in my incredibly lucky attempt. This fight also teaches the player the value of buffs. The White Mage raises the defenses of your fearless frontline fighter. The Black Mage buffs his attack speed, allowing the fighter to make multiple cuts with the potent silver sword against the devious Dark Elf Astos. Again, destiny has shown its favor. The Warriors of Light prevail. Astos lies defeated, and the heroes retrieve Matoya's stolen crystal. It's time for our heroes to do a little backtracking, all the way back to Matoya's cave to deliver the crystal. With her sight returned, Matoya rewards us with her most potent herb, capable of breaking the Elf Prince's curse. Returning to the Castle of Elf, the warriors give the mystical herb to the prince's attendant, who prepares and administers it. With the prince once again conscious after a long 5-year nap, he instantly recognizes his saviors as the destined Warriors of Light and entrusts them with the mystic key. This key now grants us access to all sorts of locked rooms scattered throughout the southern continent, but perhaps the most important one is located all the way back in Conaria Castle, where we first learned about the existence of the mystic key. Accessing these locked rooms grants us the TNT, a powerful advanced explosive that we know a certain canal-digging dwarf would find very useful. TNT might seem a little anachronistic and out-of-place object given the medieval fantasy setting of Final Fantasy, but stick with me, it'll get a whole lot stranger. The Warriors of Light return to the cozy cave of the dwarves and deliver the TNT to Narek. The mining master wastes no time in completing the canal, which gives our heroes access to the great blue oceans. Recalling the rumors of a troubled town far to the west, the Warriors of Light set sail and leave the confines of the Aldi Sea. Their next destination, Melmond. The town of Melmond. The word mel is similar to the French root for melancholy or sadness, while the word monde is similar to the Old French term monde, meaning world. Put it together and you have a term resembling the phrase sad world. Taking one look at Melmond, we can see why. The town is in disarray with an unusual amount of graves compared to other towns we visited, and critical infrastructure such as the clinic and the item store are completely destroyed. Speaking with the shell-shocked populace, we learn that a vampire attacked the town. We even meet Jim the Dwarf, who has come to investigate the attacks Melmond has been suffering, and perhaps discover the origins of the rotting earth phenomenon plaguing the continent. We also learn that the Orb of Earth, the very orb our warriors carry, is capable of reversing the earth rot. It seems destiny has led our heroes here for a reason. The warriors hear about a mysterious sage living out in the wilderness, apparently undeterred by the monsters roaming the lands there. With more villager interrogation, we find a little more information about the mysterious floater artifact. Apparently it was created by an ancient, technologically advanced civilization that used it to power their flying ships. These advanced peoples apparently used to prosper in the far northern reaches of the world. Keyword being used to. Then we hear about a strange creature named Titan that loves to eat rubies. And finally, we meet the famous scholar Dr. Una, who seems insulted that we don't already know who he is, but we'll keep his name in mind. With the tragedy of Melmond fully revealed, our heroes make for the Sarda Cave to the west. On the way there, we run into the GR, or Great Ogre, which serves as the poisonous, green-tinted variant of the normal ogre we fought before. Traveling further west, the Warriors of Light must pass through a narrow cave to reach the western end of the island. Attempting to do so brings us in contact with the giant Titan. He refuses to let us pass, but also doesn't seem interested in combat either. Noting that they must now keep their eyes open for a ruby to appease the mighty Titan, our heroes leave the cave and travel south towards the last region of the island they've yet to explore, which brings them to the entrance of the Earth Cave. The Earth Cave, the source of the mysterious rot slowly creeping across the lands. The voice of destiny calls, the orbs shimmer with primal energies. Something powerful, something truly evil lurks in this foul pit. Our Warriors of Light ready themselves. The Earth Cave, unlike the Marsh Cave before, appears to be a true cave, but unlike the Dwarf Cave, the tile set for the floor seems different. The dark red hues and bulbous malformed black circles more closely resemble a festering wound than a craggy cave. As our heroes descend, we encounter a host of new enemies we've yet to encounter on the surface. The first enemy, the Bull, is clearly ripped from the pages of ancient Greek mythology, where a monstrous, half-man, half-bull called the Minotaur famously stalks a twisting prison known as the Labyrinth. Except instead of a labyrinth, we have the twisting caverns of the Earth Cave. The story of the Minotaur is a cautionary tale. In the original story, the Minotaur is born from a sinful pairing between a bull and a woman. King Minos, the ruler of Crete, fails to fulfill his duty to the god Poseidon, who then punishes the king by causing his wife to become infatuated with a bull. The moral is, don't betray your duties, or calamity will stalk you. Investigating a treasure room, the warriors encounter the first of a special enemy category, the elemental enemy. This one, simply named Earth, is a chaotic embodiment of its namesake. The Earth has become animate and rises up against our heroes. We'll talk more about the core importance of the elements in general and how the elementals fit into the overall Final Fantasy narrative. The next enemy is the Troll, which in my view has one of the coolest enemy sprites in the game. A green humanoid monster with pink fleshy eyes, grasping its head in some mixture of agony and mania. The fantasy troll naturally owes its roots to Tolkien's characterization of the monster. It's a tall, brutal, muscular creature that turns to stone when exposed to sunlight. Again, we go back to Norse mythology, where the term trolley was a general term that described a variety of Norse monsters, but they were generally characterized as creatures lurking outside the orderly confines of civilization. Witches in a bog, supernatural beasts in the woods, monsters in the wilds. Tolkien took this general concept of Norse monstrosity and formalized it into the creature we more commonly think of in fantasy, a humanoid creature corrupted from something that already existed. In Final Fantasy, the troll seems in anguish, perhaps struggling against its own unnatural flesh. Another interesting creature we run into is the cockatrice, likely a shortened word of the medieval mythological creature, the cockatrice. The legend of the cockatrice goes back to 17th century Europe, where it's said that if an egg laid by a rooster, which is already an interesting biological challenge in and of itself, is then incubated by a servant, the resulting animal will be a cockatrice. The cockatrice is half dragon, half rooster, and can petrify its prey with a single touch or with an evil gaze, much like a gorgon. The cockatrice was considered a symbol of sin. Mentions of it in the Bible, specifically Isaiah 59:5, say that, quote, "They hatch cockatrice eggs and weave the spider's web. He that eateth of the eggs dieth, and that which is crushed breaketh out into a viper." The verse uses the act of creating a cockatrice as a metaphor, explaining that sinful ways produce destructive outcomes, like a monster that can petrify with a simple look. Pushing further into the depths, our warriors arrive at a chamber entrance flanked by serpentine statuary. There, in between these Luciferian monuments, is the vampire. No doubt, this evil creature is responsible for the misery and destruction inflicted on Melmond. He states that all living things were born to die. No one can defeat me, the vampire. He mocks mortality, not just by word, but by the nature of its existence. Vampires are immortal, feeding on the lifeblood of the innocent, lurking in darkness, shunning the light, and cursing God. All living things were born to die. No one can defeat me. Our heroes will seek to prove him only half right. With a potent combination of holy harm magic and destructive black magic fire, the arrogant bloodsucker is reduced to ashes. Looting the nearby treasure chest, the Warriors of Light find a rare ruby. It seems appropriate that the vampire was guarding the ruby, since the gemstone symbolism behind the ruby represents blood and life force. And we know that the Titan wants to eat this small red round object, which might resemble something like a crystalline apple. Before leaving, our heroes take a peek at the rear chambers of the vampire and encounter a strange stone plate blocking further progress into the Earth Cave. But for now, we have a creature to feed. Back in Titan's tunnel, Titan confirms our suspicions after munching down on the hard-earned ruby. He says, "Tastes so sweet." After traveling through Titan's tunnel, the warriors make a short trek southeast into Sarda's cave. Sarda's cave is an interesting locale because it almost feels like this place should be crawling with monsters, and yet here there are none. Exploring deeper in the cave, we meet the sage Sarda, who readily hands over the rod and explains it can be used to shatter the mysterious stone plate in the Earth Cave and reveal a way to reach the source of the Earth's rot. I found Sarda especially interesting because the people of Melmond state he's a sage that isn't afraid of living in a monster-infested area. Yet, when we get to his cave, there are no monsters to be found. It makes me wonder if Sarda is actually some sort of grizzled veteran warrior that's decided to live out his retirement years in a remote part of the world. Another interesting note is that Sarda sounds like it could be derived from the term sardius, which is a type of red gemstone mentioned in the Bible that's likened to other red gemstones like carnelian. And in order to reach Sarda, you have to retrieve a sardius-like stone, the ruby. Before rejoining the Warriors of Light, we're at a point in the journey where we can talk a little bit about one of the narrative themes in Final Fantasy I. And that theme is the concept of elemental balance. It's already been hinted at heavily by now, but the Warriors of Light each received a mystical orb of power. There's no explicit reason as to why these particular adventurers came into possession of these orbs, but I have a strong suspicion as to the implicit reason, which we'll talk more about later. Regardless of how they got the orbs, it's important to understand about the nature of each orb. The orb of earth, the orb of fire, the orb of water, and the orb of wind. The ancient Greek philosopher Empedocles theorized that life consisted of four main roots, which would later be characterized as four main elements: earth, fire, water, and air. Starting to sound familiar yet? With the liberty taken that air and wind are synonymous in this instance, Final Fantasy is making use of the ancient idea that existence consists of these primal forces. Empedocles claimed that all matter could be explained by mixing these foundational roots in different ratios, and he even theorized that these elements were never truly created or destroyed. They simply changed mixture, which to all of you physics buffs out there might sound awfully similar to the law of conservation of mass, which wasn't officially formalized scientifically until the 18th century by Antoine Lavoisier, roughly 22 centuries later. It's always incredible to me finding out just how clever our ancient ancestors were. So building off the idea that the world is governed by 4 core elemental forces existing in balance, what happens if that balance is corrupted? In the course of our grand journey, we haven't been introduced to the source of this corruption, but we do have a means of correcting it, the elemental orbs of power. Destiny has chosen our warriors. Recall again from the prophecy that when the wind stops, when the sea is wild and the earth begins to rot, that, quote, when the world is in darkness, 4 warriors will come. And remember that they will each hold an orb. Our warriors of light might not understand the exact execution of their task. All they know is that it's their destiny and their duty to fulfill it. And remember the symbol from the world map? I think it represents the story of Final Fantasy. The sword and shield are the warriors of light. The 4 studs in the shield are the 4 orbs of power. And the serpent entwined around the blade are the monsters and obstacles the warriors must contend with. Speaking of warriors, let's get back to them. Our heroes return to the depths of the Earth Cave. Fighting their way back to the vampire's lair, the warriors approach the strange stone plate. Much like how Moses or Saint Patrick strikes the rock to produce water, or how Saint Benedict blesses the poison wine, resulting in the evil cup breaking into pieces, our warriors shatter the stone plate with Sarda's mystic rod. They delve deeper into the abyssal Tartarus. 2 new enemy types await us here. The first is the Sphinx, which has a famous mythological tale attached to it. The Greek hero Oedipus arrives at the city of Thebes, which is currently under siege by the Sphinx, a strange chimerical combination of a woman's head and chest with the body of a lion. The Sphinx prevents anyone from entering the city unless they answer her riddle. A wrong answer is instant death, the victim being devoured by the Sphinx, or in some versions of the myth, tossed off a cliff. However, Oedipus, being a man of destiny himself, confronts the Sphinx and correctly answers her riddle, freeing Thebes from its occupation. However, here in FF, there is no riddle to be asked, only feral combat. The next new enemy is the Giant. The Giant shares a lot of the same mythological origins as the Ogre, although the enemy sprite in Final Fantasy gives the Giant a very weightless look, like he has more agility than a creature his size has any right to have. Finally, the Warriors of Light reach the deepest point of the earth. Something radiates with evil from behind a final set of doors. The warriors push through into a chamber lined with jagged rows of stalagmites arrayed around a pulsating ball. From within its evil core, the ball cracks open and something emerges. It declares itself to be Lich, the fiend of Earth. This creature, Lich, is undoubtedly behind the rotting curse plaguing the Earth. The Lich is a direct descendant of the well-known Dungeons & Dragons undead spellcaster type. The word Lich itself comes from an Old English word that literally means corpse. Early Christians warned about seeking forbidden knowledge, and the Bible even states that seeking to know the future or attempting to consult with the dead is an outright sin. The fantasy villain we know as the Lich today was likely derived from an H.P. Lovecraft tale from 1933 called The Thing on the Doorstep, which features a woman that learns how to transfer her mind to different host bodies, starting with her husband. In some versions of the Lich mythos, a Lich's soul is tied to a magical container called a phylactery that must be destroyed to truly kill a Lich and prevent it from transferring or resurrecting itself. But with this Lich, this Earth Fiend, his essence seems to be wholly present in his Grim Reaper-esque appearance. As with other undead enemies, our Warriors of Light attack with holy prayer, burning fire, and purifying silver until the Lich is defeated. With the evil ball dispelled, the warriors approach the mysterious altar. With a beam of elemental light, the orb of earth is restored and the rotting of the earth is stopped. As an added benefit, the warriors are magically teleported out of the depths of the cleansed Earth Cave, allowing them an easier return to Melmond. With one of the orbs of power restored, our heroes decide to seek out Lucan, who's rumored to be in a town far to the east. After a brief resupply, our heroes set sail, navigating around the edge of the southern coastline before landing in the previously inaccessible docks of the eastern end of the continent. As they trek inland, we encounter another new enemy, the Pede, shortened from the word centipede. This is another of the giant arthropod-class enemies in the game. It's a centipede, only bigger and more aggressive. Centipedes in East Asian mythos are typically associated with venom and decay, even though centipedes generally eat other bugs, while millipedes are more likely to be found nibbling on decaying matter. After crushing some giant bugs, our heroes finally arrive at the town of Crescent Lake. Entering the town, our Warriors of Light spend their hard-earned gold on a series of new spells. We also run into an advanced spell called Exit that no one seems to be suited to cast, yet. Crescent Lake is a peaceful town, so peaceful that we find a man dozing by a pair of graves. It seems this place has yet to be affected by elemental strife. Exploring a little further, the warriors find a clearing where an order of 12 sages have gathered. One of the sages turns out to be Lucan, the sage that proselytized the famous prophecy we see at the intro to the game. This council of sages serves as a collection of knowledge about Lucan's prophecy, feeding our heroes additional knowledge surrounding the chaos affecting the world and giving them guidance about what to do next. They look to the stars for answers, divining knowledge from the heavens and checking it against ancient prophecy. We learn that the elements are in disarray due to the actions of the four fiends. 400 years ago, the wind started going out of control. Then 200 years after that, the earth and the water followed suit. Now the element of fire is destabilizing. The fiends have invaded crucial places of power around the planet, built elemental altars, and are using these altars to control and channel away the four root elemental forces of the world. We also learn that the fiends, particularly the wind and water fiends, have teamed up to crush the various civilizations of man over the years. The fire fiend apparently went dormant, but has recently awakened shortly after the Lich was defeated. The sages fear that the reawakening of the fiend of fire who lurks in Gurgu volcano might lead to a catastrophic eruption. Equipping our warriors with a canoe, they urge them to seek out and stop the fiend of fire before something truly destructive happens to their town. With their newfound knowledge, the warriors use their canoe to travel further into the continent's interior. Traveling the rivers, we run into a handful of new water monsters. First is the Ocho, which is likely derived from the D&D monster called the Otyugh. An Otyugh is described by Dungeons & Dragons as an oval-shaped creature with a large central mouth and a set of tentacles and with additional mouths at the end of each one. Notable about the Otyugh is that it serves as a dungeon trash collector, consuming the waste of other dungeon monsters. When doing research for what inspired the Otyugh, a common suspicion was that Gary Gygax took the design elements and mythology from the quote, Star Wars trash monster we now know as the Dianoga, a tentacled monster that consumes filth. The Ocho in particular even has that distinctive Dianoga eye stalk. Second is the Caribe, which was very confusing to research initially since most of the monster names are a derivative from European mythos. The Caribe, however, is a common name for the piranha in Venezuela, which I found to be an odd, if not interesting, choice of enemy name. This is a base animal type enemy that we've seen before, like the tiger or wolf. It's a piranha, often attacking in large groups and only appearing in fresh water. The final new encounter here is the Hydra, which has deep roots in Greek mythology. However, I'm going to save the ancient origins of this particular monster for a future video. After working their way through the winding rivers, our heroes finally arrive at the foot of Gurgu volcano. The volcano in fantasy settings often symbolizes impending calamity. Whether it's Mount Hotenau, Mount Doom, or Black Rock Mountain, the molten volcano is not just a geological formation, but an embodiment of the domain of Hades, the domain of hell breaching into the world of man. The Warriors of Light must start at the rim of the volcano, carefully navigating the molten floors before finding a passage deeper into the mountain's depths. As before, we encounter an elemental enemy here, simply named Fire. Just like the Earth Elemental, it's likely that this Fire Elemental is an embodiment of the discord being caused by the Fiend's corruptive machinations. Deeper inside, the heroes stumble across the largest treasure hoard we've seen so far in their adventure. The chests contain plenty of gold along with a nice silver shield, which finishes out a full set of silver armor for our fighter. But this room isn't unguarded. Here we encounter the Grey Worm. The giant worm is an interesting mythological concept. The idea of a massive worm-like creature with an insatiable appetite can be traced back to the famous Jormungandr of Norse mythology. In the story, the great world serpent Jormungandr is thought to eat, consume, and grow so large that it's able to circle the entire Earth. In Final Fantasy I, the Grey Worm feels large because of its unusually large health pool and hard-hitting melee strikes. Its variants will build on its lethal Jormungandr lineage even more, but we'll discuss it further when we get there. After looting all that treasure, I realized that I wasn't going to have enough supplies to make it to the bottom, so time for a resupply. Back in Gurgu, our heroes descend deeper into the rumbling heart of fire. Along the way, our fighter picks up the Ice Sword, which is a blade that's actually better than the Silver Sword. Hard to believe we're actually finally replacing it. Further down, the fighter also picks up the Flame Shield, providing our front line with much-needed elemental fire defense. Reaching the final stretch of Gurgu, we run into two more new enemies. First is the Agama, which is an iguana variant. Again, this is another interesting name choice since the Agama is the name of a small red lizard typically found in sub-Sahara Africa. This lizard was likely chosen due to its distinctive red markings, which make it look like something you would expect to crawl out of a fiery crater. The other enemy type is the Red Dragon. Dragons might be one of my favorite mythological monsters, and I think that if I were to attempt to express that love here in this video, I might very well double its considerable length. So I will spare you that for now and reserve dragon mythology for another day. Ultimately, the Warriors of Light reach a familiar sight, an ominous ball, the counterweight to our hero's own orbs of power, rests between a pair of serpentine statues. Just beyond is the Fire Altar, the place of power needed to restore the orb of fire and quell the rebellious rumblings of Gurgu Volcano. But before that, the warriors must confront the ball. As before, the foul sphere bursts open, and out emerges the meditating creature. The fiend taunts, "I, Carrie, will now show you the force of fire. You shall burn in its flames." The name Carrie is thought to be a mistranslation of the name Kali, who is actually a goddess of time and truth. Despite her frightening appearance, she is not actually considered evil and is actually a symbol of the divine protective mother. Carrie is certainly not that. It's thought that this strange name choice was meant to avoid copyright issues with the creature she actually resembles, the Merilith. In Dungeons & Dragons, the Merilith is a fierce, demonic, multi-armed snake woman. Gygax doesn't appear to have a specific inspiration as to where the Merilith comes from, but given its Greek-sounding name, it might not be a stretch to suggest this half-snake, half-woman creature might be inspired by other famous Greek snake monsters. For example, the Lamia, a blood-sucking or in some versions child-eating half-snake, half-beautiful woman who was once a complete beautiful woman before being cursed by the goddess Hera. Or it could be Echidna, another snake woman hybrid referred to as the mother of monsters and thought to be the origin of the Gorgons. The warriors charge the Fiend of Fire, taking advantage of her vulnerability to slow and mute spells. Carrie is a powerful fire spellcaster, but that advantage, with a lucky roll, can be stripped away. Muting her spells in combination with attacks from the powerful Ice Sword lay waste to another foul fiend. The Orb of Fire is restored, and the Warriors of Light are teleported safely outside the stabilized volcano. Upon returning to Crescent Lake, the snoozing man by the graves awakens. He gives us a good lead about where to find the powerful floater stone. Apparently it's hidden in a nearby ice cave to the north. With no immediate clues as to where the next fiend is hiding, it seems like a good time to try to find the floater. Let's go navigate some rivers. After some more river adventures, our intrepid heroes arrive at the frosty ice cave. Fire is chaotic, and an evil cave is a portal to the underworld. But ice is a static agent, freezing but not necessarily killing. The inferno moves swiftly, but the glacier decimates by degrees. The ice cave is something of an enigma in Final Fantasy I. It's not located on a mountaintop or at the poles of the world. In fact, looking at the Explorer's Handbook map, we see that the ice cave is located at roughly the same latitude as Sarda's Cave and the Dwarf Cave. And yet, this frozen pit is home to a host of frost variant enemies we've seen before. Frost giants, frost wolves, and even frost dragons. The fighter even gets to pick up some frosty ice armor to gain full resistance to both fire and ice. Could the floater artifact be causing this strange temperature differential? A notable enemy here is the Sorcerer, which is a variant of the wizard enemy we first encountered way back in the Marsh Cave. The Sorcerer variant is decidedly more Cthulhu-y than its melee-only base. This version can stun, but perhaps more worrying, its attacks have a chance to instantly kill the Warrior of Light it hits. The tentacled faces of these dangerous foes resemble the mind flayers of Dungeons & Dragons, which themselves are a fusion of Lovecraftian tentacle aesthetics and Pulp Fiction-era stories of alien mind control. Searching through the passages of the ice cave, the Warriors of Light reach the final, unopened chest. But as they begin to open it, something looms nearby. The Eye, an enemy very likely derived from the Beholder enemy of Dungeons & Dragons fame. See, I told you I would have a better match for you. The origins of the D&D Beholder, according to Gary Gygax, come from game designer Terry Kuntz, originating from a bad dream he had. While this explanation sounds perfectly plausible to me, I can't help but speculate what exactly powered the images of Kuntz's nightmares. It's my thought that nightmares are fueled by the energies of our subconscious, and the subconscious is that chaotic collection of anything and everything that pierces the silent walls of our apathy and manages to lodge itself in the collective craw of our imaginations. What thing, what concept, or what psychic trauma did Kuntz experience that caused him to dream up a floating eye with a mouth? I would argue the ubiquitous Kakomati might play some indirect role here. A special note here, this eye enemy drops a surprisingly large amount of gold and XP, especially compared to its relatively simple difficulty. So the Warriors of Light might have made use of that fact here to fund some very expensive shopping trips in the near future. Once the eye is defeated, our heroes retrieve the ancient floater, a device that can apparently make an entire ship fly. Taking a peek at the Explorer's Handbook, it's possible to get a hint about what to do next here from someone in Elfland. Taking that advice into account, the Warriors of Light head to the isolated Ryukon Desert to the south. A handy feature of Bika's pirate ship is that it can launch a canoe into the mouth of a river, which allows our heroes to venture into the dusty Ryukon Desert. With the floater device in hand, the adventurers comb over the sandy wastes until finally, the ancient airship rises from its sandy grave. Getting on the airship in any Final Fantasy game has this tremendous psychological effect. It's liberation, it's freedom. In any of the Final Fantasy games, when the airship is involved, it's easy to get lost just zooming around the map. In the air, we're free from random encounters, our movement speed is increased many-fold. The entire world is opened up. After familiarizing themselves with the function of the airship, our heroes head north, spotting a small town nestled off the coast of the northwestern continent. Unfortunately, the warriors must land their ship considerably downriver due to the dense forest in the area. Working up the river, we encounter the gator enemy, which is another of the base animal types that will get some more interesting variant upgrades later on. After fighting their way past the local wildlife, the warriors arrive at the town of Onrak. Onrak is one of those town names that really tripped my backwards text sense, but flipping the name gives us Carno, which isn't much of an improvement. However, it is notable that Onrak is an anagram for the word anchor, which seems appropriate to me given that this is the only town in the game that actually has a small dock incorporated within the town's borders. Speaking with the citizens of Onrak, we learn about a man named Underhill who apparently operates a caravan somewhere out in the western desert. We also learn that Onrak used to be home to a water shrine that was attacked and sunk in a joint assault by the fiends of water and wind, likely during the large-scale destruction these fiends launched against all of the northern civilizations of man hundreds of years ago. Investigating further, a boy tells the warriors about a mysterious object falling from the sky near a waterfall, and the object itself was some sort of robot. Yes, a robot in medieval high fantasy. And you thought the TNT was strange. We also meet Dr. Una's brother, who tells us that Dr. Una has been hard at work deciphering and learning the cryptic Lefanish language, the ancient language of the Sky Warriors. However, apparently Dr. Una needs a language slab to complete his work. We also encounter a non-hostile dragon who tells you about Bahamut, who honors those who prove their courage. Finally, at the end of the dock, the warriors see a submarine peeking just above the waves. The woman nearby needs a mystical substance called oxyale in order to enable the sub to safely reach the sunken water shrine. Our heroes also make note of the wildly expensive but powerful level 7 magic spells. Grinding time is upon us. With the town of Onrak fully explored and a few more points of interest to investigate, the Warriors of Light ride down the river and board the airship. On the way back, we encounter another new enemy, the Wyvern. The FF Wyvern is a dead ringer for the Dungeons & Dragons description, a dragon subspecies with 2 legs and a pointed tail, often with the tail containing a stinger. The Wyvern is perhaps best known from its use in medieval heraldry dating back somewhere between the 12th or 15th century AD. As a heraldic symbol, it represented power and protection. Some versions of the Wyvern describe its wings as eagle wings rather than dragon wings, which almost gives the creature a more unnatural, chimerical feel, like a sphinx rather than a reptilian dragon. Taking to the skies, the Warriors of Light spot a town built high up in the mountains with ample space to land an airship. The warriors disembark and arrive at the elevation-advantaged town of Gaia. Gaia in Greek mythology is described as one of the oldest, if not the oldest, beings in the universe. She existed before Zeus and even before the Titans. She was the first to crawl out of the void of chaos. She is the cosmic mother, birthing a variety of titans and engaged in complex celestial politics, overthrowing her own son and aiding the ambitious Zeus against his own father Kronos. There's a lot of interesting symbolic implications to be dissected from that story, but I'll have to save that analysis for another time. Performing their, by now, routine investigations of the town of Gaia, the warriors learn that a city to the south speaks a strange, unintelligible language. No doubt this is the remnants of the Lefanish people we were told about in Onrak. We also learn about the fairy that used to live in Gaia's fountain. The fairy in the fountain is an ancient being, and there seems to be many points of origin for it. The most obvious might be the Greek naiad, which is a female water spirit that is bound to a particular body of water. It was a common belief that the waters containing naiads had mystical cleansing and healing properties. Later, this idea of a magic woman in the waters is reinterpreted in Arthurian legend, where instead of a playful water sprite, we get the king-making Lady of the Lake. The Lady of the Lake is an agent of destiny, authorizing Arthur to become king, cures Lancelot's childhood illness, and trains him in the ways of the noble knight. And of course, Final Fantasy isn't the only famous franchise to make heavy use of the fairy in the fountain motif, but we'll get to that game in due time. We learn that the fairy was kidnapped from her fountain by an unrepentant pirate and sold to a caravan, like the one we heard about in Onrak. And finally, we hear about a towering structure standing out in the middle of the Yanakurm Desert called the Mirage Tower. Before leaving, the warriors buy a round of pro rings, short for Protect rings, which serve as some of the best armor in the game. The Protect ring is lifted directly from the Dungeons & Dragons item of the same name. Enchanted rings were no doubt made famous by Tolkien, but the concept stretches back into the ancient world. Like the Old Norse story of the Andvaranaut ring that initially was able to magically locate sources of gold sitting in the earth. However, after it was stolen, the victim, Andvari, curses the ring so that whoever wears it is cursed with misfortune. Fortunately for us, the Pro rings contain no such curse. With Gaia's inhabitants thoroughly questioned, our warriors of light take off to the remote Cardia Islands. Cardia is perhaps taken from the Greek word cardia for heart. However, the concept of cardia in Greek is not necessarily the anatomical blood pump from which we get so much of our biological naming conventions from, but is instead a reference to the seat of a person's will, emotions, and personality. What's striking about this view on a person's core is the absence of knowledge. The Greeks seem to understand the realm of knowledge was a separate place from the realm of will, emotion, and personality. And here in these mystical islands lies the embodiment of will, the mysterious civilization of the dragons. They live underground now, but before the destruction wrought by the fiends, these dragons used to live harmoniously with humans in a technological utopia that used to exist just north of where the islands reside today. It is also where the Warriors of Light learn about a place of trial, the infamous Castle of Ordeal. Also of note, while the caverns beneath Cardia are monster-free, it's still possible to run into one new monster we haven't seen yet, the Manticore, or more appropriately, Manticore. Although it appears to be a poisonous Sphinx variant, it's actually taken from Persian mythology, which is an interesting change of pace from our Greek and Norse-centric creature origins. The Manticore takes its name from the Old Persian words marcha, meaning man, and quar, meaning to eat. So when we put them together, it becomes man-eater. The Manticore is a nightmarish mishmash of predator parts, the body of a lion, the tail of a scorpion, and the face of a human. In later Greek adaptations, sometimes the Manticore would be given bat or eagle wings along with a strident, trumpet-like voice. The Manticore becomes known as a symbol of the unnatural, a work of the devil that made a mockery of God's divine design. Exploring the islands further, our Warriors of Light discover a vast underground throne room. Near the rear of the opulently candlelit expanse stands a large dragon. This is Bahamut, King of the Dragons. I'm used to actually pronouncing this name as Bahamut, but apparently the classic pronunciation is Bahamut, which is very strange, but I'm going to try to go with the older pronunciation, even though every fiber in my being wants to say Bahamut rather than Bahamut. The myth of Bahamut is an interesting one, to say the least. The name comes from an adapted medieval Islamic cosmology where Bahamut, an immeasurably massive fish, serves as a foundation for the great bull Kuyuta to stand on, who itself supports an angel who then supports the world. This was a way to explain how the universe is ordered. Creation rests on an angel, but as we descend to the next level, the nature of the creature becomes less engaged with the ordered world. When we finally descend to Bahamut's level, it's an uncaring fish, unaware that its existence supports anything at all. This is not dissimilar to the gaping maw of chaos begetting Gaia, who is herself the origin of the divine pantheon. So how did a gigantic cosmic fish become king of the dragons? In 1957, Jorge Luis Borges wrote a book called El Libro de los Seres Imaginarios, the Book of Imaginary Beings, which served as a sort of encyclopedia of mythical creatures sourced from the globe's most influential mythologies. At this point, Bahamut is still a giant fish, but the term is essentially reintroduced to Western audiences thanks to Borges' fascination with old myths. Can relate. At some point, Gary Gygax is looking for a name that carries power to name his new benevolent god dragon creation, and at some point encounters the name Bahamut, likely from a source derivative of Borges' works. However, Gygax just takes the name Bahamut, but not the form. And so now Bahamut is the king of the dragons rather than some uncaring cosmic fish. King Bahamut declares that if the warriors can bring back proof of their courage, then he will honor them. It's unclear what that means exactly, but the warriors of light have shown themselves to be adventurers of destiny, helping because it's the right thing to do, rising to challenges because failing to do so is unthinkable. Also, quick note, look at the pattern of the candles. To my eyes, this looks like the face of a dragon. I thought that was a really nice touch by the developers. And so the warriors fly towards the lonely castle just east of the islands, but the castle is surrounded by treacherous marshes and thick forests, which means the adventurers must land further out and hike through the perilous terrain by foot. On the way in, we encounter the saber tea, a tiger variant that is likely meant to represent a saber-toothed tiger. This is the first of a few prehistoric variants that we begin to run into. Alongside the saber tea is the Catman. Cats in general are associated with spellcasters in a fantasy setting, sometimes acting as a familiar or a trusted messenger. They are lithe, silent creatures that can slip through trees with effortless grace. Combine that with the cruelty of man and you have a lethal werecat creature, a mystical abomination, perhaps a product of a spellcast gone wrong. Pushing through the forests of aggressive cat creatures, our heroes arrive at the Castle of Ordeal. Located in the middle of a swamp, the eerie Castle of Ordeal, the Castle of Trial, is perhaps more of an intentional metaphor than a true FF dungeon. Passing through the entrance, we're greeted with a row of columns meant to funnel us to a mysterious sage. This kindly old man closes the mystery of the crown we retrieved way back in the marsh cave. It turns out the crown is actually part of Bahamut's trial of courage. So this suggests that Astos, the Dark Elf, was actually going to attempt the trial himself. But that begs the question we've already been asking. Exactly what does receiving Bahamut's honor actually mean? If Astos was after it, it must involve something of great power. The old sage disappears into the castle, leaving the warriors of light to proceed to a small throne room to the northwest. With the crown in hand, the warriors touch the throne and trigger the first in a series of teleportation spells. The Castle of Ordeal is a giant puzzle and more a test of trial and error or even a trial of patience than it is a trial of courage. And yet our heroes are guided by destiny, the proof of which shimmers in their orbs of power. Touching the various gleaming white pillars scattered throughout the trial space allows our heroes to teleport from one chamber to another. Along the way, we encounter several variant enemies we've seen before, such as the humorously named Man-Cat, who is the variant of the Catman enemies lurking in the forest, or the Zombul, which is an undead variant of the bull enemy we saw in Gurgu Volcano. We get to see one new enemy type, the Mudgul, which is likely a shortening of the name Mud Golem. Golems are another fantasy outlier in that their popular incarnation doesn't come from the usual suspects like Greek or Norse mythos, but instead from Jewish Kabbalistic tradition. There's an interesting tale about the golem I wanted to share with you that comes all the way back from 1590, where Rabbi Yehuda Lov ben Bezavel creates a golem made of clay and activates it via sacred ritual so that it can protect the Jewish community with its unquestioning obedience and immense strength. And things go well for a time. The rabbi attends his duties and maintains the golem, and in return, the golem ensures the safety of the community. However, eventually the rabbi becomes lax in his responsibilities and forgets to attend to the creature he's created. As a result, the golem goes mad and goes on a destructive rampage throughout the Jewish quarter. Here in Final Fantasy, the golem is made of mud, suggesting that maybe this golem was once a well-maintained clay creature, but has slowly deteriorated over time, its clay structures degraded from prolonged exposure to moisture from the surrounding swamps. A special note here, the warriors can also pick up the amazing Zeus Gauntlet, which does exactly what one would expect a piece of armor named after the Greek god of thunder to do. It can cast lightning too for free, which is a fantastic upgrade for, in my opinion, a certain black mage that has to use a stabby dagger when they've run out of spells to cast for the day. We also grab the useful heal staff that, similar to the Zeus Gauntlet, allows the user to cast the party-wide heal spell for free. It's not nearly as potent as the Zeus Gauntlet, but it provides a decent amount of trickle healing that cuts down on overall resource drain. Another interesting enemy we encounter here is the Nightmare, which is a variant on the Mad Pony enemy from way back at the start of the game. This is the first supernatural horse enemy we run into and is likely derived from the Nightmare or Hell Horse enemy in Dungeons & Dragons. The D&D version is described more as an evil spirit than actual horse, which could be derived from other ancient malevolent horse spirits like the Gaelic Kelpie. The Kelpie is a shape-shifting spirit that typically uses the form of a horse and usually lurks in rivers or lochs. It would often lure victims near the water in order to drown them. The Warriors of Light solve the teleportation maze and fight their way to the final throne room of the Castle of Ordeal. There, a single chest sits at the foot of the royal chair. Opening it reveals a small tail, a tail that looks like it belongs to some sort of rodent. Is this it? No doubt the Warriors of Light felt a bit of confusion coming all the way here simply to retrieve a severed tail, but they don't have time to ponder for too long before they're attacked by another dragon variant, the zombie dragon. If the dragon is a symbol of chaos, sin, and hoarded wealth, then the undead version adds a layer of corruption to that symbol. Sin becomes entropic putrescence, no longer tempting, simply vile. Even an evil dragon's chaotic nature is limited by the decay of its features. Instead of hoarding fabulous wealth, the zombie dragon protects a shriveled rodent's appendage. Our warriors put the unclean thing out of its misery. With Rat Tail in tow, our heroes return to Bahamut, King of Dragons. He honors our warriors by granting them class ascension. The fighter becomes a valiant knight. The black belt becomes a lethal grand master. And our spellcasters graduate from white and black mages to white and black wizards. This change doesn't just represent an increase in power and ability, but also a maturing process for our heroes. Much how, like a newborn baby's head is roughly a quarter of its own body, our adventurers up to this point had proportions that were similar, their heads accounting for roughly a third of their body. But now their heads are brought into more heroic proportions. They have that classic heroic Dorito-shaped body. Our warriors are all grown up. With their ascension complete, the heroes disembark for the small desert west of Onrak to search for the missing fairy. While looking for the desert caravan said to possess the fairy, we encounter a new enemy, the Ankylo. The name Ankylo is likely a shortened form of the word Ankylosaurus, which from the Greek means fused or stiffened lizard. This seems like an appropriate name since the real prehistoric Ankylosaurus was a walking biological tank with its bone plates called osteoderms, which literally means skin bones. Another interesting enemy we run into is the Cerberus or Cerberus, which is the supernatural variant of the hyena enemy. Cerberus is another one of those enemies that appear in all sorts of video games and definitely deserves more time, but the short version is that Cerberus is typically characterized as a three-headed hellhound that guards the gates of Hades in Greek mythology. Fun fact, Hesiod describes Cerberus as a 50-headed dog. Now that would be a cool Dark Souls boss fight. Or a terrible one. Wandering the desert long enough, the Warriors of Light locate Master Underhill and his caravan. He only sells one item, the stolen fairy, for an exorbitant 50,000 gold. Luckily, our heroes had been farming eye in the ice cave for a while. The heroes rescue the fairy through epic financial discipline and return it to the town of Gaia. Upon visiting the fairy in her throne, she rewards the warriors with the oxyale hidden in the fountain. It isn't stated until later, but it's worth mentioning that oxyale enables water breathing. With the rare material secured, the adventurers journey back to Onrak and deliver the oxyale to the submarine engineer. With the aquatic craft restored, our heroes descend into the abyss to reach the water shrine. The sunken water shrine of Onrak, a place that might have once symbolized Onrak's maritime influence in the region, cruelly sunk beneath the waves by the combined efforts of the wind and water fiends hundreds of years ago. The Warriors of Light find a safe place to dock their submarine in the middle of the ancient shrine, suggesting that part of the ruin might be fully submerged while other parts have pockets of breathable air. The shrine contains a host of water-aspected enemy variants and aquatic beasties. The great shark, the wizard sahag, sea snakes, and sea trolls. Even the disturbed water elementals are here to represent the chaos inflicted on the globe's waterways. One notably new creature introduced here, however, is the Naga. The Naga is an ancient mythological creature that might date back as far as 1200 BC in Vedic literature, which possibly predates the modern understandings of other famous snake women like the Lamia or the Gorgons of Greek mythology. In Hindu tradition, there are a series of sacred texts called the Four Vedas. One of these Vedas, the Atharva Veda, advises to treat serpents, which it refers to as Nagas, with reverence. Fear them, respect them. From the Atharva Veda, hymn 56, we get a quote, "Let not the serpent slay us, O gods, with our children and our folk. Let it not close the open mouth, nor open that which is now closed." Fast forward to around 400 BC, and the Naga begin to take on human qualities, sometimes being able to fully shapeshift into a human. At this point, they are seen as guardians of bodies of water. It's also around this time that the Naga becomes associated with fertility and starts to become associated with feminine aspects, starting to sound a little familiar. By the time the Naga starts showing up in Dungeons & Dragons, they are characterized as a highly intelligent race of anthropomorphic snake people. There are male and female Naga, but the female archetype seems to be the one that sticks most firmly in the fantasy zeitgeist, and the one that makes it into Final Fantasy's bestiary. Ascending to the top floor, the Warriors of Light discover a treasury holding not just powerful armor and weapons, but also mermaids that appear to be cowering in fear. We learn from them that one of their kind, named Daryl, escaped to the surface and grew legs, which we met during our initial investigation of Onrak. Even the mermaids recognize the adventurers as chosen by destiny, exclaiming that they are the prophesied Warriors of Light. Then we learn that if they can't regain control of the power of water, they will all be turned into bubbles. This is likely a reference to the Hans Christian Andersen version of The Little Mermaid, where the titular character strikes up a bargain with a sea witch to gain human legs to pursue a prince she has fallen in love with. If she can convince the prince to love her, then she lives happily ever after. If she fails, she will dissolve into sea foam. This is also where we officially learn that Oxy Ale grants water breathing, which explains why our heroes can move about the shrine without drowning. One of the shrine treasures is the critically important slab, which will be used later to learn the Lefanish language. Finally, we learn a little bit about the Fiend of Water, Kraken. He lurks at the shrine's lowest levels. At this point, my inventory was completely full, so I had to make a return trip to offload some gear before diving back in. Proceeding deeper into the water shrine, the heroes grab their first ribbon, which is one of the best headpieces in the game. The ribbon might be a reference to the Greek tainia, which was a ritual ribbon tied around the head or tied around sacred objects. This marked the person or object as set apart, consecrated, and placed under divine protection. The tainia even makes an appearance in Greek architecture, providing a visual dividing line that served as a symbolic foundation to the Greek friezes that were typically placed just above. But now, in these most abyssal depths, our heroes of light enter Kraken's chambers. Kraken's evil sphere shatters and evaporates, and Kraken bursts forth, the foul fiend of water. If you're like me, you might mistakenly assume the Kraken was another famous monster from Greek mythology, but it is in fact from the Nordic mythos. The name Kraken likely refers to a much older Norse monster called the Hafgufa, which is described as a monster so massive that it seems like an island. All it has to do is open its massive mouth and draw in hapless fish and any sailors unfortunate enough to be nearby. It wasn't until the 18th century when books like The Natural History of Norway started using the general monster term Kraken to refer to gigantic creatures like the Hafgufa. Eventually, this broad name began to crystallize into the concept of the Kraken we know and love in fantasy today. Fog and Fast are our knight's best friend, empowering his already devastating swordsmanship. Meanwhile, the potent black mage takes full advantage of Kraken's natural weakness with a constant barrage of lightning attacks. And our Grand Master does what he does best, punching the Kraken into squiddly pulp. With the fiend defeated, the water orb is restored and our heroes return to the surface. Only one orb of power remains to be restored, and the only lead we have is the mysterious Lefane people. With the critical Lefane slab, our heroes make a quick stop at Melmond to speak with Dr. Una, who can finish his research and teach the warriors the ancient Lefanish language. Our newly educated polyglots of light board their airship and travel to the remote northeastern town of Lefane. The Lefanish people are the surviving descendants of the ancient and highly advanced Lefanish civilization that once ruled the skies. Their most elite soldiers become known as the Sky Warriors, and they were the previous owners of the very airship the Warriors of Light had been cruising around in. It was 400 years ago that the wind became wild and chaotic, and this was also when the Warrior of Light prophecy was revealed and propagated. Fortunately, these modern-day Lefanish, like most of the surviving populace around the globe, recognize the touch of destiny that distinguishes our Warriors of Light. At the height of their power, the Lefanish built and controlled a massive flying castle, along with a crew of robots to maintain it. However, Tiamat, the fiend of the wind, attacked the castle, taking it over and scattering the survivors to the surface. Over the centuries, it seems the survivors have slowly gathered to form the town of Lefane in order to preserve their language, culture, and to spread the sacred prophecy. The last 5 Sky Warriors, perhaps trained in the old Lefanish ways, ventured on a quest to discover how to stop the world's rot, but never returned. Oddly enough, it's suggested that they live on as bats. More on that later. We also learn that Mirage Tower, the place we heard rumors about earlier, serves as the last remaining access point to get to the floating castle. However, the tower itself has been sealed. Luckily, the Lefanish, seeking to play their part in Destiny's design, hand over the chime, which serves as a key to the Mirage Tower. Finally, we learn of a disturbing rumor about some terrible power pulling the strings of the 4 fiends. Before heading out, the Warriors of Light visit the secluded Lefanish magic shops, which gives access to the best magic in the game. Life 2 for our white wizard, who can now restore and fully heal a KO'd party member, and the powerful nuke spell for our black wizard, which does exactly what you think it does. With our party resupplied, our adventurers disembark for the Yanakurm Desert and breach the confines of the ancient Mirage Tower. The Mirage Tower is a soaring structure that blends in with the sandy wastes of the vast Yanakurm Desert. The inner structure features rusty tile sets and strange alien pillarwork that hints at a glorious past slowly being stripped away by the razor-sharp winds. Venturing inside, we encounter a new enemy type, the Chimera, whose namesake I've used many times as an adjective to describe other creatures in this game. The Chimera comes to us from Greek mythology, where she is described as a lion with a goat head protruding from its back and a tail that terminates with a snake's head. Much like the Manticore, later incarnations of the Chimera get addition of eagle or dragon's wings. The myth goes that the Chimera was terrorizing the lands of Lycia, which is now modern-day Turkey. The hero, Bellerophon, tames the mystical winged horse Pegasus and manages to slay the beast with a leaden spear that gets melted by the Chimera's flame breath mid-throw. The molten metal gets lodged in the beast's throat, ultimately suffocating it. As the Warriors of Light navigate the tower, they encounter some robots that appear to be awaiting orders from their Lefanish careers, unaware that their masters are likely long dead. We also encounter packs of vampires here, which suggests that perhaps one of these vampires managed to escape the Mirage Tower and make his way to Melmond. Another interesting note is the adventurers can find the cool but mechanically useless Vorpal blade here, which is likely a reference to the blade of the same name in Lewis Carroll's poem about the Jabberwocky. Ascending to the top floor, our heroes encounter a robot that informs them the teleportation room requires a cube, but that it was taken by another robot somewhere to the west. The game doesn't explicitly say it, but I theorize this might have been an attempt to prevent any other powerful creatures from escaping the floating castle. With a new destination in mind, our heroes travel back to the airship and scour the area west of Onrak, where the mysterious falling robot was thought to have landed. Moving upriver, they find a conspicuous waterfall. Perhaps this is the waterfall the little boy told the warriors about. Pushing past the current, the heroes breach into the cave hidden behind it. Deep inside the concealed cavern, the warriors of light encounter the wayward robot. He returns the cube to our heroes, explaining that it is the key to teleporting to the floating castle. With the cube in hand, the warriors must return all the way back to the top of Mirage Tower. Once there, they step on the fully functional transfer pad and are teleported to the orbiting space station that is Floating Castle. One of the new enemies we encounter here is called the Evil Man, which is admittedly a little confusing until you look at the Japanese version of the name, Desu Naito, or Death Knight. I'm assuming this change might have been made because the term Death Knight is simply too metal for Nintendo of America. Although the concept for the fantasy Death Knight used in Final Fantasy was taken from D&D, the origins for a cursed knight archetype are quite old. One of the more interesting fallen knight myths comes from the Arthurian legend where Sir Balin hastily kills the Lady of the Lake, which immediately marks him out by fate to be doomed. King Arthur recognizes the moment it happens and banishes Balin from the court. Later, Balin is engaged in combat with a man named King Pellam, who manages to break Balin's weapon. Out of desperation, he grabs a sacred spear, in some versions the Spear of Longinus. The sacred spear is not meant for combat. However, Balin thrusts the holy spear and kills Pellam. As a result, the castle they're fighting in and the very land they're fighting on becomes a wasteland. I can't help but think of the Death Knights in World of Warcraft and their death and decay spell when I think of this story. Exploring the ancient space station further, our heroes run into a final elemental enemy, the Air Elemental, typically associated with a Naga variant simply called a Great Naga. The Warriors of Light also get to close the loop on another outstanding quest when they retrieve the ultra-rare Adamant from the Floating Castle's treasury. With this important item in hand, our heroes decide to retreat and resupply and make a journey all the way back to the Dwarf Cave. And finally, hand over the Adamant to Smith the Blacksmith, who gives our knight the best weapon in the game, Excalibur, which is a shortened form of the name Excalibur. From old Arthurian legends dating back to around 900 AD, the story of Excalibur is described as the blade that the mystical Lady of the Lake gifted to King Arthur. The blade was considered mystical in its own right, being able to blind enemies with holy light and described as virtually indestructible. With our knight fully equipped, the warriors head right back up into the floating castle. Ascending to the upper reaches of the orbiting castle, the warriors come across an observation window overlooking their world. Here we get a chilling hint as to where our next battle will ultimately be. The elemental powers the fiends have been gathering all this time appear to be flowing to a singular nexus point, the Temple of Fiends. Fighting through the imprisoned creatures and robotic guards, our heroes stop to interact with panels studded with complex linking lights and adorned with twisting circuitry. But the very technology powering the floating castle seems to be under the sway of the foul fiend. Working their way to the highest reaches of the floating castle, the Warriors of Light breach what appears to be the central control room. There, they spot the evil sphere. It crackles with lightning. A terrible voice lashes from the fiend ball. I, Tiamat, the fiend of the wind, will now put an end to your adventure. Tiamat might be one of the oldest creatures we've covered so far. She is described in ancient Babylonian mythology dating all the way back to 1200 BC, and that's just when it was written down. There are some estimates that this oral tradition might stretch back to as old as 1800 BC. Tiamat is described more as a chaotic force, not necessarily evil, but an embodiment of the chaotic state of nature. Over time, Tiamat begins to be described as a terrifying chaos dragon and mother of monsters, much like the Greek echidna. The storm god Marduk confronts the chaos creature and kills it. He then splits her body. One half becomes the heavens, and the other half becomes the earth. It's a tale of chaos being tamed and turned into order. There's some interesting psychological commentary to be had here about slaying the chaos in your mind and making order out of the pieces. Despite the terrifying nature of Final Fantasy I's Tiamat, it has one fatal flaw. She has a critical weakness to poison-aspected death spells, and it just so happens our Black Wizard knows just such a spell called Brack, or Break Spell. If it lands, it will instantly kill Tiamat. With the Wind Fiend shattered, the Warriors of Light restore power to the Wind Orb and are teleported safely back to land. The prophecy, at least how we've come to understand it, has been fulfilled. The Fiends have been defeated, the Orbs of Power restored. The warriors travel back to Crescent Lake to consult with the Order of Sages there. What we learn here is bizarre. The Temple of Fiends was built in order to siphon elemental energies from the other elemental altars, which were themselves possibly constructed to destabilize and absorb energy. We learn that this has all been in service of perpetuating an endless loop to preserve one man's desire to never die: Garland. In Hindu tradition, there's a concept called the Kala Chakra, the wheel of time, that describes the cyclical nature of existence. And there seems to be some truth to that. We recognize the patterns of humanity, the rise and fall of civilization, and the cycles of war and peace. Here in Final Fantasy, Garland has created a wheel of his own. But unlike in the real world, where each iteration of history seems to learn at least a little bit from the last, Garland's iterations are meant to be loops to preserve his own life at the expense of trapping all of reality. However, the Warriors of Light learn of a way to stop the loop, to break the wheel. They must travel back to a weak point in the time loop, a point 2,000 years ago where Garland takes control of the 4 elemental fiends and flings them forward a few hundred years to begin the cycle of calamity and civilizational collapse. At some point, Garland is born, destined to be defeated, then rescued by the power of the fiends, and then sent back in time to start the process all over again. At some point, Garland's perfect cycle was breached, just enough for a prophecy to declare the coming of our valiant Warriors of Light. These would be the warriors to stop this madness. With their final quest in mind, our heroes return to the Temple of Fiends. They approach the Black Time Gate, but not before speaking to the skittering bats. These are the cursed Sky Warriors who previously tried and failed to stop Garland. They were cursed to live in the forms of bats, but killing the fiends has weakened the curse enough for them to speak. The 4 orbs, these talismans of destiny, are the key to breaking the loop. The heroes step forward, their orbs of power in hand, the Black Time Gate opens, and they step forward into the past. The Temple of Fiends, 2,000 years in the past. Gone are the crumbling columns and cracked walls. This is the temple in its prime. Perhaps this freshly built central altar was created to honor the elemental balance of the world, but now that noble structure has been corrupted. Something hateful lurks beneath and has attracted powerful monsters into the temple's chambers. Here we encounter some interesting variants. First is the Chimera, based on D&D's Gorgamera. This particular variant is a D&D original, where they've mashed 2 ancient monsters together, the Chimera and the Gorgon. The boss defending the area is an Eye variant referred to as Phantom. In the Japanese version, this enemy is called the Death Eye and is meant to serve as a more lethal version of the Final Fantasy's take on the Beholder. After dispatching the Temple Guardian, the warriors encounter a strange altar, almost like a sepulchre. The slab appears similar to the one we saw in the Earth Cave, but it doesn't respond to Sarda's rod. But it does seem to respond to Sarah's lute. So there's a recurring theme in FF1 around unconventional keys that I think is cool, although I haven't really grasped the meaning. But I wanted to just list them off because I think it's neat, and maybe some of you might have some theories of your own. You have Sarda's rod and the Earth Cave slab. You have the cube and the floating castle teleporter, the chime and the Mirage Tower, the crown and the Castle of Ordeal, and finally the lute and the Temple of Fiends. Now there's an argument to be made for the indirect keys in the game, like needing the Oxyale to unlock the Water Shrine. But here I was just looking at the unconventional keys that were used directly in the opening of a door or other passageway. What follows in the Temple of Fiends is a series of floors themed after each element and defended by that element's fiend. However, these rematch fights are with the fiends at their prime power. They haven't been channeling their strength into a sphere of power for hundreds and hundreds of years. They have larger health pools, they hit harder, and use more powerful spells. Lich opens up the fight with a nuke spell. Carrie is immune to my cheap muting tricks and pelts the party with powerful fire magic. Kraken, perhaps the most dangerous of the rematch fights, somehow hits even harder than he did in the Water Shrine. And Tiamat, she no longer has a vulnerability to break magic. The warriors are forced to confront her potent thunder and lightning magic head on. But our warriors have become more powerful as well. Our mages have become wizards, the Black Belt has mastered the art of the fist, and our knight wields the Holy Excalibur. With the fiends defeated, our warriors of light descend into the final floor. This floor is eerily quiet, not a monster in sight. Something powerful is just beyond the door. The light warriors, following destiny's guiding hand, cross the final threshold. The great enemy is revealed to be Garland, the disgraced knight who was rescued and pulled back 2,000 years in the past to perpetuate an endless cycle of madness, all in the service to his own immortality. This makes me wonder if Garland has his own prophecy, a warrior of darkness, destined always to lie broken in a ruined shrine to powerful demigods long past. Perhaps this inevitable fate drives him mad. He can't die this way. He won't die this way. He will perpetuate the wheel. He will live forever. But this cycle is different. The warriors of light have arrived in the past at this critical moment when Garland was going to send the fiends into the future. But the warriors have slain the very monsters he intended to plague the world with. The fiends may be dead, but their latent power still remains. Garland summons the lingering, twisted elemental powers of the defeated fiends and gathers it within himself. In this shrine that represents all elements, Garland transcends and becomes a creature of all elements. He is the arbiter lich of death, the entropic Carrie, the unknowable abyssal Kraken, and the chaotic churning void Tiamat. Garland has become chaos. Chaos, coming from the ancient Greek chaos, refers to a massive void, a structure before all structures, a concept before all thought. And it's from this yawning void that the principal titans emerge, Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros. But in Final Fantasy, chaos is represented as a golden humanoid dragon with access and resistance to all elemental magic. As we've discussed before, gold is the color of divinity, but here the gold is paired with the symbol of the dragon, a symbol of Satan. Chaos here is an icon of blasphemy. He's literally composed of the most twisted aspects of nature. And this fight is appropriately a challenging one. Chaos has a massive health pool. The white wizard buffs everyone's defenses. The black mage hastens the attacks of our melee duo. Each time Chaos takes a turn, the warriors of light brace for what might be the last attack they can take. The black wizard casts a powerful nuke spell. The knight wields the sacred Excalibur, and the Grand Master performs a whopping 9-hit combo. Finally, Chaos is defeated, his body disintegrating into darkness. The time loop is broken. The world is freed from the wheel. With the time loop broken and Chaos defeated, the corrupted elemental forces flow back into the ailing earth, restoring balance. The epilogue tells us that the Warriors of Light are teleported back to their own time with the knowledge of their exploits erased from the memory of those freed from the time loop. However, there seems to be some lingering dream of the old calamitous timeline that gets passed down as a myth by the dwarves, elves, and dragons. This might be because those races seem to be a bit more mystically attuned than the humans. As the epilogue card reaches its end, it leaves us with a message that I think we can all benefit from. Never forget the good and true. And that concludes the symbolism of Final Fantasy I. This was my largest project to date, so if you managed to make it all the way through it, then I sincerely thank you. But there's one lingering question, a little bonus for you if you've made it all the way here. It's something that I kept thinking about while rewatching all of my gameplay footage and writing this very script. It's that little hand with the index finger. Just who does that hand belong to? Well, in my view, that hand represents the hand of fate. It selects start. It literally chooses which heroes will be the Warriors of Light, even what their names will be. It is the agent that injects the orbs of power into the cycle of the endless wheel. It guides the intuition of our heroes from what spells to cast, items to buy, and potions to drink. And who controls this hand of fate? Well, it's you, the player. You are the agent of destiny. You are the hand of fate in Final Fantasy. So it makes me wonder, what invisible hands guide our own destinies? Perhaps there's something to point you in a direction and you need merely heed its call. What do you think? Are we guided by destiny? Do we have a guiding hand selecting what options we should take? Or are we our own agents? Thank you for watching.